If you so choose, please stand with me and remain standing for the pledge to our nation's flag.
Heavenly Father, as we begin this meeting this day, we want to give you thanks, Father. I want to thank you mostly just for Beaumont, Texas, Lord, for the good things that we're seeing. Father, we know that there's trouble all brewing across our nation, Lord, but we have seen very little of it in our city, and I'm so thankful for the leadership of this city that has kept us, Lord, in these times of turmoil. As we come, we commit this meeting to you, Lord, that your will might be accomplished in it, because your will will certainly always be the best for Beaumont. I ask you to lead the leaders, Lord, open their hearts, their eyes, and the ears of their understanding so they can hear the best way to take this city, Father God, because I believe with all my heart that the welfare of this city is the reason that we're meeting here. I thank you for this. Thank you for this opportunity to be with these wonderful people, and I ask your blessing on it in the name of our Lord Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Please join me in the pledge to our nation's flag. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Pastor Cameron. May we have the roll call, please?
Mayor Ames.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Pate.
Here.
Councilmember Neal.
Present.
Councilmember Getz.
Present.
Councilmember Felshaw.
Present.
Councilmember Samuel. Present. And Councilmember Mouton. Present. Thank you.
Thank you. We don't have any presentations or proclamations today, so I will move right into public comment. Now would be the time for any citizen who wishes to speak. If you would like to make public comment today on scheduled agenda items 1 through 3 or the consent agenda, the time to do so is now. If you haven't already done so, please fill out the green slip, hand it to the officer. We will call out your name as it was received. We would appreciate if you keep your comments to 3 minutes. The green light will come on when you approach the podium, and the red light will come on when your time is up. We do have a work session and a public hearing, and after that, we will have an item number 4. If you do want to speak on item number 4, the time to do that would be during the public hearing, right before it. And if you desire to speak on any other item, I will open up the microphone at the end of the meeting for that purpose. But right now, it's for items 1 through 3 or the consent agenda.
We don't have any, Mayor.
None?
No.
Okay, if I see no one, Council, will you please make a motion for the consent agenda?
Make a motion to approve.
Thank you. Is there a second? There's a motion and a second on the floor for approval. Is there any discussion? Councilman Getz.
Yes, on item D on the consent agenda, I just want to make sure that I understand the dynamics of what's happening as we approve this lawsuit. As I understand it, the city of Beaumont, and I asked the city attorney to confirm, the city of Beaumont was dismissed from this case. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And as part of the contract that we have with the Beaumont Police Officers Association, the city is obligated to provide a defense to police officers when they are sued in their official capacity. Is that correct?
That's incorrect. It's statutory.
It's statutory. Okay. So that's why we're doing that. We're providing a defense for this police officer. There's nothing by selling this case that says we take a position one way or the other with regard to this lawsuit as a city. Or is that true?
I don't know if that's true or not, Councilman. We discussed this in the executive session where we talked about all of the details.
I understand that, but we're, as a city, we're providing a defense as we're statutorily obligated to do. We're not taking a position on this as a city. We're just providing that defense. Is that correct?
Well, the council is the city and will take a position. I don't take a position on it. It's for the council to decide.
Okay. I've said what I think I needed
I'm
to.
merely seeking authorization to settle this lawsuit,
All right.
as we discussed in an executive session.
Okay. Thank you.
Is there any other discussion on the consent agenda? If not, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries unanimously. First item, please.
Mayor and Council, item number 1 is an ordinance entitled, an ordinance amending the fiscal budget of the City of Beaumont for the fiscal year 2020 to appropriate additional revenues in the hotel occupancy tax fund, to appropriate additional expenditures in the hotel occupancy tax fund, providing for severability and providing for repeal. In August of 2018, the City Council approved a budget amendment to transfer $2.1 million from the Hotel Occupancy Tax Fund to the General Improvements Projects Fund for the renovation of the Terrell Park Visitor Center. On May the 12th of this year, the City Council awarded a contract to McGinnis Construction for those renovations in the amount of $1,473,000 with a base bid and approximately $52,600 for several alternate bids. Since the bids came in under the amount that was estimated, it is recommended that, and our recommendation has changed from what was in your packet. In your packet Friday, we were recommending that $450,000 be transferred. After reviewing it again with staff this morning, it is recommended that $350,000 be transferred back to the general improvements, or from the General Improvements Project Fund to the HOT Fund. The HOT Fund is expected to receive less revenue than what was budgeted this year due to COVID-19. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have. The administration recommends approval.
Thank you, Council. Is there a motion on this item?
So moved to approve, Mayor.
Thank you. There's a motion on the floor. Is there a second?
A second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second on the floor. Is there any discussion? Okay, Councilmember Neal?
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Manager, can you explain why 350 versus 450?
Yeah, when we reviewed it this morning, the architectural fees, which we paid $81,000 to date, and we think we might pay another $50,000 in architectural fees. It's 8% of the contract amount, and that's the main reason.
Thank you.
Councilmember Getz?
Mr. Hayes, there's been some people from the Terrell Park Coalition that have been talking about the desired necessity to put a roof over the back part of the building, and especially since lumber is at a low, which is why the bid came in below that we needed to do. Is there any possibility that that could be considered?
The council can make that decision.
Okay. Is that something that we should do before we start getting construction going on it, or is that something that we can come back and revisit later?
You can revisit it anytime.
Okay. Well, I know that there's a lot of people out there that would like to see this building put under roof, and in the back part of the building, even if it's not equipped with HVAC, it could be put under roof and restored to look like it did when it was originally built by the CCC in the 30s. And I would like for us to consider doing that before we get very far down the road in construction, because it would be a great place to have a venue for our types of receptions and things out there in the Terrell Park community. I know we already have some out there, but this would be unique because it would be a replication of what it actually looked like back in the 30s when it was originally built. It wouldn't have to have HVAC, although it could, but the time to put the roof on the building, I think, would be while we have the contractor on site and while we're doing this. I have spoken to the architect. He has indicated that it could be done probably for as little as an additional $300,000, $400,000. So I would like for us to consider doing that at this time.
Okay. There is a motion and a second on the floor for approval of the recommendation, which is to move the $350,000 back into the hotel occupancy tax fund. Before we do anything different, I need to entertain that motion. So if there's no other discussion, or anyone that wants to add into what Councilman Getz said, I will call for a vote on this item. So all in favor of the motion as presented, which is per the recommendation, say aye, please.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Okay, the motion carries with one no. Okay, next item, please.
Mayor and Council, item number 2 is an ordinance entitled, an ordinance granting a franchise for solid waste collection and transportation services to Action Trucking Company. Action Trucking Company has requested a franchise agreement. The company is focused on construction and demolition waste. The franchise provides for a term of 1 year from its effective date and a franchise fee of 7% of gross revenues received for service. According to the city charter, franchise ordinances require readings at 3 separate council meetings. Today is that first reading. The administration recommends approval.
Thank you, council. You have heard the reading of item number 2. Is there a motion on this item?
Move to approve.
There's a motion on the floor. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second on the floor for approval. Is there any discussion? Okay, all in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries unanimously. Next item, please, number 3.
Item number 3 is to consider a resolution approving a 5-year lease purchase agreement with KS State Bank located in Manhattan, Kansas, for the purchase of a fire truck. Back in March of this year, council approved a reimbursement resolution for the lease purchase agreement to reimburse the city for the purchase of a fire truck in the amount of $749,488. Bids were requested for a fixed interest rate to finance the truck with the first payment in arrears. The total lease purchase cost, including interest, would be $810,110.95. The administration is recommending, again, an agreement with KS State Bank with an interest rate of 2.65%. And if you approve this item, funds would be budgeted in the fiscal year 2021 budget, specifically in the Capital Reserve Fund, where you all normally do this. The administration recommends approval.
Thank you, council. You've heard the reading of number 3. Is there a motion on this item?
Make a motion to approve.
Thank you. There's a motion on the floor. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second on the floor. Is there any discussion? Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mayor.
Councilman Neal.
Mr. Manager, is it standard protocol for us to finance these versus paying cash for them?
It is standard for us. It depends on the fund. For example, in the fiscal year 2020 budget, we recommended, the council approved, we bought a number of garbage trucks, for example, in the solid waste fund, because we had a lot of cash. Our fund balance was very strong, and we thought that was the thing to do. We normally finance these fire trucks because of the high dollar amount. Otherwise, you'd just be taking it either out of fund balance, which we try to preserve. So we think it's better in these large purchases, especially the general fund, to pay it over a 3 to 5 year period to finance them. If the council felt otherwise, you could definitely pay cash. You're just going to draw down that fund balance.
What's the life expectancy of this truck?
Probably 20 plus years.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments from council? Okay. All right, there's a motion and a second on the floor for approval. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries unanimously, and I believe we have a couple of work sessions today.
Yes,
If you'd
ma'am.
like to take us
Mayor and
into the first
Council,
one.
Bart Barkowiak will come forward. We're very pleased to have Lockwood Andrews and Noonan here, and Cheek and Associates that worked on this drainage plan along with our partner, Drainage District 6. And Bart will come forward at this time and make the introductions.
Good afternoon. The City of Beaumont has been working to better identify flood-prone areas within the city and how to address them for a number of years. As part of this effort, the city contracted with Lockwood, Andrews, and Newman, Inc., otherwise known as LAN, to put together a stormwater master plan. The project was split into three $500,000 phases. The initial resolution was passed on November 14th, 2014, and defined all three phases with a not-to-exceed number of $1.5 million for the entire project. On October 13th, 2015, council passed a resolution awarding the second phase of the project in the amount of $500,000. And then again on October 11th, 2016, council passed a resolution awarding the third and final phase of the project in $500,000. In the summer of 2016, we also applied for a $287,000 flood protection grant from the Texas Water Development Board to expand the plan and include areas located in the Hillebrand Bayou and the Neches River watersheds. The city did receive that grant. DD6 participated with a $75,000 match towards the study. So with everything all in, the total amount invested in the Stormwater Master Plan was $1,854,852.85. We received the final version of the plan in December of 2019. We intended for LAN to come present to council, and unfortunately we were delayed due to COVID starting early this year. But as Kyle mentioned, LAN is here today, DD6 is here today, and I believe Donald Smith from TxDOT is also here to hear the presentation. Russ Ford, Matt Mangus, and Charles Shoemate are with LAN, and I believe Matt is going to present the study to y'all.
Thanks, Bart. As Bart mentioned, my name is Matt Mangus. I'm with Lockwood, Andrews, and Newnham, LAN, and I'm here today to present an overview of the master drainage plan prepared for Beaumont and DD6. I'm joined by Russ Ford and Charles Shoemate, also of LAN, and also Andy Chica of Chica & Associates, our teaming partner on this project. So today what we're going to do is take a high overview of what the master drainage plan is, what it covers, and some of the outcomes of it. Since it is citywide in nature, we certainly don't have time to dive into every problem area over 30 to 45 minutes today. So we're going to present a high level. If there's any questions, we can look into those and provide answers after the fact. Today, really, we're going to focus on three things. We're going to introduce the study, what were the results of the study, and then talk about the proposed improvements recommended as part of that study. So we're going to talk about those at a high level and not look at each project on an individual sense this afternoon. 18 of them would be too in-depth for today's discussion, so we're going to look at those at a high level. Before we go too far, drainage tends to be fairly lingo-heavy and a lot of definitions, so we want to hit a couple of key terms that we're going to be talking about this afternoon. Frequently, we hear the 100-year storm referred to. Commonly, it's thought that the 100-year storm occurs every 100 years. A more accurate way of saying that is you have a 1% chance of it occurring in any given year. So that means we have a 1% chance of it occurring this year, and we have another 1% chance of it occurring next year. So it's based on statistical analysis, but it's important to remember that it is just a percentage likelihood of occurring in any given year. So the 100-year storms, the most severe storm that was analyzed as part of this study. The 25-year storm, similar to the 100-year storm, does not occur every 25 years, but has a 4% chance of occurring in any single year. 10-year storm has a 10% chance of occurring in any year, and then the 5-year and 2-year storm have a 20% and 50% chance of occurring, respectively, in any year. So that 2-year storm, that's a pretty frequent storm. 100 years, a less frequent storm. More severe, less frequent storm. A few other key terms. Detention and retention are commonly part of stormwater improvements. Detention and retention, the difference between those just being how the water is stored. Detention is a temporary storage of water, so the rain event happens, the pond fills up, and then drains out afterward. Retention is where it's a permanent storage of water, so it fills up during an event, and then you rely on evaporation or infiltration or reuse for that water to draw back down after the storm event. Level of service, this is something that we're going to be talking about when it comes to how are the stormwater systems performing. So level of service is how that stormwater system is performing according to the criteria. So do you have ponding? Do you have ponding that exceeds certain depths? Or do you have insufficient capacities in storm sewer systems? It is important to remember that the roadway system is part of the drainage system for severe events. So you will see ponding in roadways even for more severe events. In order to keep that below ground, you'd have very large storm sewer systems for all storm events. Another thing that we see a lot of, especially in the Gulf Coast and Beaumont, is overflow. So overflow is flow that leaves one particular watershed or storm sewer system and enters another one. So there's not always nice, neat boundaries for drainage areas, and that water will flow from system to system if you don't have enough capacity in one or the other. This afternoon, I'm not going to dwell too much on the computer modeling that was used, but talk a little bit about it and show some examples of it. This was done with what's called 1D and 2D modeling. It is a newer style of drainage modeling that more accurately represents flooding events. And what it does is represent both your subsurface system, so your storm sewer systems, culverts, storm sewer, and then also all of your overland flow. So that 2D represents the overland flow. How it flows between streets or along streets is really important to understanding accurately how a storm sewer system and stormwater system are working. Study limits, as Bart mentioned, this encompassed the entire area of Beaumont, as well as some, as we'll get into in a few more slides, some areas to the west to look at contributing areas. Drainage areas don't always follow political boundaries, and so some of those drainage areas extend off to the west and influence some of the areas within the city of Beaumont. So some introduction about the master drainage plan. Generally, a master drainage plan will describe a city's drainage characteristics. So how does it operate during a design storm? Where are the deficiencies? Where could it have improvements? And then recommend drainage system improvements. And then based on those, they can be prioritized and develop a plan for the future. As Bart also mentioned, this was completed in 2019. And we're here today to give you a broad overview of what was in the master plan. A little background on why. Why do we update the master drainage plan? It's been 30 plus years since the last update. It was a document that got a lot of use and was frequently referred to, but it was time to update that. That plan was hard copy in nature, so there wasn't digital information to go with that. It was limited in some of the reporting capabilities relative to today's options, so it didn't have visual ponding extents that we'll show here in a few slides. And you can add metrics, things like structures at risk, inundated roadways, and impassable intersections based on current information. Beyond just the technical changes, there's been a number of regional changes in the last 30 plus years in the Beaumont area. There's been new developments, there's been infrastructure improvements, repairs, replacements, additions, projects by DD6 for ponds and culverts, and also stormwater improvement systems based on the city. So in order to understand how everything is functioning, a current understanding of everything is required. Out of the master drainage plan, there were seven major goals. The first one, that was one of the largest tasks in the overall study, was developing the digital drainage network. So this was a very time-consuming task in order to understand what storm sewer infrastructure was installed where within the city. It wasn't enough to know that we have storm sewer on a particular street. We need to know how big is that storm sewer, how deep is it in the ground, in order to understand its capacity. So we have to know where all of the storm sewers connect to, where are the inlets, where are the manholes, and where do they outfall. So this was a considerable effort that we'll talk about more in a few more slides. Another one of the goals was the watershed-based approach for this. Rather than looking at a singular storm sewer system or a singular drainage channel, this was looking at an entire watershed at once. Because what happens is, as watersheds receive a rainfall event, one system can spill into the next system, into the next system, into the next system. So if you're not accounting for that overflow, between the three other systems, you won't have an accurate depiction at that bottom system. So the watershed-based approach allows us to develop an existing conditions understanding, which is just how is the stormwater system performing for a particular storm event. What this allows us to do is better define flood risk, so understand where we have ponding that doesn't meet criteria, where may there be structures at risk, or where may there be impassable roadways. This helps us identify problem areas, obviously based on reported information, city staff, emergency responders, and also being able to look at some previous data that we'll talk about more here in a few minutes. And then finally, once we've identified those problem areas, we can start to identify proposed improvements and ultimately reduce flood risk. Proposing improvements in areas for retrofit, which is bringing older areas up to current criteria, can be very difficult and can often be very expensive depending on some of the constraints within the area. And then finally, once proposed projects are evaluated, it's important to prioritize projects based on factors to get your best bang for your buck early in the project. A couple of important things to mention. The master drainage plan was not focused on hurricane rainfall or storm surge, but really looking at a localized rainfall event and how that can be handled. As Doug mentioned, Bart mentioned, this was a jointly funded project through the city, DD6, and the Water Development Board. The Water Development Board, this was the flood protection planning grant process, and this was a competitive selection process, so this was not everyone that applies is selected for this grant. The city competed against other entities within the state and was selected for this to better understand ultimate flood risk within the city. So the scale of the study, obviously this included city limits plus some out to the west. It encompassed about 115 square miles spread over 3 modeling regions. And the regions the city was broken up into regions to phase it over years, and also those regions allow for watershed breaks between storm sewer systems. There are storm sewer interconnects that cross the region boundaries, which are accounted for, but it was from a workflow production standpoint, breaking it up into individual regions. Within all 3 regions, we had about 420 miles of storm sewer, so a lot of asset information developed for that. So that's every pipe, culvert, roadside ditch within the city. And on top of that, there was an additional 525 miles of open channel. So the open channel and storm sewer systems, looking at those together is important. It's important because your storm sewer systems drain to your channel, and if your channel maybe doesn't have enough capacity, your storm sewer systems upstream can't drain either. So it doesn't matter how big those upstream systems are if you don't have any downstream capacity. So it's important to look at these collectively to understand how the entire system is going to operate. As I mentioned, the data collection was one of the key components to doing this project. So it was a comprehensive digital inventory that prior to this project, there were record drawings available, but not a seamless data set of the storm sewer assets. Previous efforts have been done for water projects and sanitary, but this project developed the asset layer for stormwater. So the stormwater assets not only were just where is their pipe, but it was how big is the pipe, how deep is it in the ground, where are the inlets, and where does this ultimately drain. So understanding where all of that storm sewer is, its connectivity, and then blending all of that information together from those record drawings. So this was part of the effort that Andy and his staff assisted with based on their local knowledge to pull this information together to develop a seamless data set for the analysis. Without understanding where and how big the storm sewer systems were, we wouldn't be able to undertake this analysis because we needed that information to be able to go forward with the analysis itself. As we start to move into the existing conditions, it's important to understand what are the storm events that we're looking at. As I mentioned, we looked at 2-year, through 100-year storm events. So these are 50% through 1%. And depending on the event, these events range between 5 and about 15 inches of rain over 24 hours. It's important to recognize that these storms are not something that you pulled straight from a rain gauge or would be able to pull straight from a rain gauge. These are storms based on statistical information and how much rainfall has fallen over the past. So these are what are called theoretical design storms. So these do not represent exactly the rainfall you would get, but these are the storms you use to evaluate your design or your performance of your storm sewer system. So before we go show a few examples of what some of the outcome of the existing conditions and some of the sample from the data, a few of the observations about the existing conditions within the city of Beaumont for stormwater performance. These are not true everywhere within the city. These are generally some of the observations that we've seen, and they vary from place to place. But generally, we see older, undersized storm sewers in older developments or older roadways. And they are not simply undersized because they are old, but older systems were installed using different drainage criteria. So as the understanding of the science behind drainage, that rainfall information has changed. So if it was designed for a 2-year storm 40 years ago, that 2-year storm today can be larger than it was 40 years ago. So older systems, older criteria tend to be undersized. Because of that, we do see areas with cross-block flooding. So that means flooding that leaves one street, crosses a street, and flows into the next street. It may be out of the right-of-way, it may be shallow, it may be deep, it may be slow-moving, but we do see some locations of cross-block flooding. Coupled with that, we see some long-duration ponding in impassable roadways. So these are areas that may be above 6 inches for the sake of being traversed by vehicles. It may take some time for the downstream systems to drain and ultimately these roadways to drain. And then depending on location, there are areas with limited outfall depth or capacity. So those may be shallower channels that if they were deeper, you could put in larger, taller storm sewer systems and drain more water to them. They may also be areas with limited capacity overall. And then there are some channels within the city that have limited right-of-way adjacent to the channels. So there may be a channel and then homes or structures immediately adjacent to that channel that would prevent you from expanding those channels in a ready fashion. And then we do see some areas with limited capacity at underpass pump stations. So these are pump stations that are there to dry out underpasses after a rainfall event occurs, but can't keep up with more severe storm events. Within certain portions of the city, we see very large influence due to what we call surface features, such as rails and canals and roadways. They're typically elevated slightly above the surrounding area, and then you're relying on a culvert or a crossing beneath them to drain on the upstream side. And then we do see the opportunity for structural flooding for larger events, depending on location. So there are areas that's possible to occur depending on the storm event. What I'm going to do now is show a snapshot of just one particular area out of this model. So this is a numeric computer model designed to represent flooding conditions for a 1% storm event. This is a video that I'm going to show. It'll loop, and so we'll go through it a few times. But what you see on this video is what we have available throughout the entire city. You have storm sewer systems in red, so that just means where the storm sewer is. Generally, it's draining to the south here. And then in blue, we see ponding, and the darker the blue indicates deeper the ponding. And what this is representing is a 24-hour storm event. So you can see the clock at the top left as it moves through time. So this is about hour 22, near the very end of the storm event. It's going to start over. So this is the very start. You can see the rainfall starting to fall and fill up some of the isolated low spots. We can see our ponds and channels beginning to fill up as we get to the peak of the storm event at hour 12. So there's the peak of the rainfall, and we can see the water travel to some of the low points and then drain through the storm sewer systems and ultimately drain out to their outfalls. So this is information we have available across the city. This is just a small snapshot to show some of the data that is available. And using this methodology, we can understand the surface flow components, the subsurface flow components, and then also understand how long is that ponding in place. Is it in place for 15 or 20 minutes following a storm event and draining out rapidly? Or is it there in place for multiple hours following a storm event? I would argue that second one is more important than it draining out immediately after the first event. So what this does is give us a richer data set to understand how severe and where are the problems.
I have a question.
Mhm.
The rectangular and triangular
Mhm.
places that are filling up about the 6-hour mark, are those detention ponds?
Those are detention ponds.
Okay, so they're doing their job by filling up.
Yes.
Okay.
Are these snapshots available for most of the areas of the city?
The videos can be created for any spot within the city. What I'm about to show on the next few slides are some, we'll say, static snapshots, and those are available citywide. So what I'm going to do is step through the 50% or 2-year storm event through the 100-year 1% event for a citywide snapshot. So there are major street labels. I'm not going to talk about specific areas at this scale, but just to illustrate the change as you move from a smaller storm event to the larger storm event. What we'll see is the ponding depths and extents get larger and deeper as the events get more severe. So this is the 2-year 50% storm event. If you recall, about 5 inches of rain. The 5-year, we see some larger and deeper ponding. Then we move to the 10% or 10-year storm. Same thing. And then the 25 and the 100-year, which is the most severe, 15 inches of rain over 24-hour event. These images are based on a snapshot within the model. So this is the worst ponding experienced. This does not all occur at exactly the same time as you have a flood wave that moves from the top to the bottom of the system. So this is what's called maximum ponding experienced during a particular storm event. So once the computer model for this was developed, it's time to start to understand the existing conditions and actually identify some of the problem areas. It's not enough to just say it floods. You need to understand why does it flood and how bad does it flood. So some of those problem areas can be identified based on direct model output. Others were identified through discussion with the city and DD6 based on institutional knowledge, whether that be maintenance work or emergency responders or previous complaints. And then insufficient capacity can be evaluated looking at our level of service. So how does that system perform relative to our criteria? Does it meet ponding extents? Does it meet ponding depths? So those insufficient storm sewers can be identified that way. Beyond that, ponding depth and duration can be used to identify problem areas. As illustrated before, if it drains out very quickly, that's less severe of an issue than an area that ponds for multiple hours. Beyond just pure ponding depths and extents, we can look at roadways and intersections that are impassable, typically characterized as ponding beyond 6 inches is impassable to most vehicles. So we can look at how many intersections are impassable based on that. And then we can also look at repetitive loss information. So this is based on your floodplain insurance. So if somebody holds floodplain insurance for a particular structure and are flooded and then makes a claim, this information is available to cities and districts to help identify and understand where flood risk exists. So that repetitive loss information can help focus on some of the problem areas. There is one downside to that not everyone has flood insurance. So it's not always a perfect indicator of where flood risk exists. Beyond just the repetitive loss information, based on the model outputs, it's possible to identify potential structures at risk. So based on that spatial information, we can identify potential structures at risk of ponding for particular storm events. And we can also start to estimate the damage associated with a particular storm event. So for a 1% storm, we can actually estimate the damage associated with that based on 4 pieces of other information. We can generate what's called an approximate finished floor elevation. So that's the elevation that water would enter a structure. So that can be estimated based on terrain information. And then using the ponding depth output of the model, that can determine whether a structure would or would not be flooded. And then the Army Corps of Engineers has created what are called depth damage curves that relate the amount of ponding within a structure to the amount of damage within a structure. For instance, 1 foot of ponding may equal a 10% damage of the market value of that structure. The market values can then be estimated from appraisal district values, and you can blend all 4 pieces of those information together to develop an estimate associated with a particular storm event. So those damages will come into play later as we start to look at the proposed improvements and how they're prioritized and benefit is determined. So once we've identified some of the problem areas, the time begins to start looking at proposed improvements. From a very simplistic sense, it'd be very easy to say everything that was not designed under current criteria does not meet current criteria, thus needs to be replaced. It's a very costly method to do that. So what we're looking at is really the more severe areas rather than a whole system replacement. So the identification of these proposed improvements was based on repetitive loss, structure information, discussion with our project staff at the city, and then looking at passable intersections and improving roadway level of service from a ponding perspective, and then also taking into account pavement condition information that may be beneficial to get a joint project in the future. So both a pavement and a storm sewer improvement project coupled together. Because what we don't want to do is recommend a storm sewer improvement project that would run down good condition pavement that was just placed a number of years ago. So the two together help complement each other with overall projects. So the target on these proposed improvements was to provide a 25-year level of service. The 25-year level of service is a slightly more cost-effective improvement. The larger the level of service you target, the more expensive these projects become. So the 25-year level of service would seek to provide level of service for 25-year and less events, and then would reduce the flood risk for larger storm events. The evaluations for these were focused on insufficient systems, so that may be storm sewer systems, culverts, ditches, channels, and maybe all of those coupled together. And then also targeting open areas for potential detention considerations that could be a partnership project. So it was really focused on open areas, not areas with structures on them. So really an open area focus.
And again, a 25-year level is not something that might happen once every 25 years. It's something that you have a 4% chance of happening in any 1 year. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
So these proposed improvement projects, 18 planning level projects were identified. And it's important to draw attention to the fact that these are planning level projects. They are not ready for construction. So they are concepts for how big of a stormwater improvement project, where does it need to go, how big is it, what might the cost considerations be, but it would still need to go through detailed design in order to be ultimately constructed and handed off to a contractor. So these 4 projects these 18 projects were focused around 4 project types. Some had combinations of these, but they included storm sewer improvement projects, so subsurface conveyance projects. They may be boxes or round pipe, depending on size and shape and location. They may also have included limited channel improvements, so they weren't intended to be a large-scale watershed-wide channel improvement project. They were areas of pinch points or capacity considerations. Right-of-way acquisitions for the sake of detention ponds were focused on non-buyouts. So these were undeveloped properties. They didn't have structures in place, so they would be acquisitions from the standpoint of no relocation involved. And then those right-of-way locations would include detention basins for improving the overall stormwater system. The projects were prioritized according to 3 criteria and ultimately developed a overall score. This is a prioritization and ranking system similar to golf, that the lower the score, the higher the ranking in this case. So they were based on 3 primary criteria. One called the benefit cost ratio. And the benefit cost ratio goes back to the damage discussion that we had during the existing conditions. So if you calculate the damage during an existing condition, you propose a project, you reevaluate that project, and then you look at the damage reduced by that project, and then you look at that damage reduced compared to the project cost, you can generate what's called a benefit cost ratio for a particular project. So that means if a $10 million project prevents $50 million worth of damage, you would have a cost benefit ratio of 5. Anything positive above 1 means that the project prevents more structural damage than the project costs. So it's a good metric for how efficient a project is, but it's also a key component to applying for grant funding for future projects. So it's typically a very strong consideration for grant funding opportunities in the future and may help offset some of the project costs. Project cost was also included within the evaluation criteria. We all know that budgets are always asked to do more with less, and as projects are more expensive, they do become harder to encumber. So the smaller jobs or smaller projects with benefits typically are easier to construct in a timely manner. And then reduction in impassable intersections was a consideration for the sake of transportation and emergency services. A little more on the prioritization process. I did compare all of the projects against each other, and then for all 3 categories of benefit cost ratio, project cost, and reduction in impassable intersections, these were ranked and determined for all of the projects. The project costs, these are planning level, high level project opinions of probable construction cost based on unit rates of what we're seeing in the region. So they are high level opinions of project cost. Each of these criteria are ranked, and then the weighted contributions are applied to determine the total score for the overall project prioritization. The proposed improvement projects, this is not a prioritized list. This is just listing all of them together. We do have combinations of storm sewer and channel modifications, or storm sewer and detention basin projects. All told is just shy of $280 million spread across these 18 projects. Looking at them from a ranked perspective, they do change in order. They are not all confined to one particular region or one particular set of projects. So this is the ranked proposed project ranking based on the prioritization scoring. These projects are scattered across different parts of the city. We do see some larger projects there on east and south of I-10. Those are some storm sewer systems that are very interconnected and have a very long way to go to get to an outfall. So it doesn't do us a lot of benefit to improve the upstream part of the storm sewer system if the downstream part has nowhere to take that water. So some of these are some fairly substantial projects overall to carry some of that water away from problem areas. Also, as part of the recommendations, there was some recommendations for flood early warning systems, and what those help do is provide some new gauge sites, may provide, as the photo illustrates, some smart crossing, where if, based on sensor information, ponding across a roadway is too deep for a car to traverse, the arm can drop down. But what it helps do is decrease reliance on in-person alarms for low water crossings.
I have a question, please.
Mm-hmm.
So would the water activate the arm coming down?
Mm-hmm. Yes,
Not
it could.
until the water got to a certain level?
Yes.
Would it activate
Mhm.
that? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and those are site specific. This one's just an example. You would set it based on the kind of flooding conditions you see at that particular crossing. A lot of the gate arms are really to prevent people from driving through it. There's the turnaround, don't drown. And instead of having people go out and set barriers up, this could be a smart option for that. So in summary, the overall drainage master plan focused on a few major things. Boiling it down to the essentials, it developed that digital drainage inventory of all of the stormwater assets within the city. That is information that can be reused within the ongoing asset management and city works process within the city. So what that does is help inform the city know what stormwater infrastructure is where, what size is it, and what kind of capacity it may have. The watershed-based analysis in this case did not isolate to a particular storm sewer system or channel, but does provide a more comprehensive understanding of how storm events and flooding events can occur within the city. This does give us a really good understanding of stormwater deficiencies within the city, so knowing where insufficient storm sewer is in place or where those improvements could provide some additional flood risk reduction. And ultimately, out of this, 18 planning level projects were identified that can be refined through future detailed design and analysis. With that, we'll take any questions, myself, Russ, and Charles or Andy, depending on the subject matter. So, thank you.
Council, questions? Yes, Councilman Neal?
Thank you, Mayor. For the 100-year flood, you used the 14.8 inch. What are the current numbers for that?
So the current numbers, the rainfall information for this was based on some USGS information from 1998. Prior to what's come out recently, the NOAA Atlas 14 information that has up that anywhere from 2 to 3 inches depending on where you are. So it's spatially based. So at the time that this study was ongoing, the Atlas 14 information wasn't available, so that is the newest and best information available.
Okay. So the number that I think I'm being told from DD6 is somewhere in the neighborhood of 19 inches?
That's right. Mm-hmm.
What would it take to get this information and an overlay done using the 19-inch numbers? So, and I know you're not always supposed to plan for a 100-year storm, but I think we've all seen the 100, the 20, the 15, the 10, the 5, and the 2 all in the last couple of years. So, would that be useful information to do that?
It certainly could be. It would give you a different metric to look at for the sake of the current rainfall information. And then projects sized to that newer standard are going to be larger projects. Going from non-Atlas 14 to Atlas 14, we've seen costs anywhere from 20 to 30% higher for those particular projects.
And what kind of time frame do you think we would be looking at to get those revisions done?
It's something I'd have to look into a little bit more detail to give you a better answer on that.
Okay. My next question, more along the lines of, has DD6 studied this information?
Yes, we reviewed it with Doug and Dr. Joe has both looked at this information. From an existing conditions perspective, we used DD6 available information for their recent pond construction and also validation of previous flood events.
Okay, thank you.
Couple questions, because it's a work session. Joe, I've heard you were looking at 17 inches, not 19, so which one is it?
It's 18 inches. And if you consider Imelda and Harvey, you're looking at 23 inches.
Okay, so what he's talking about, council, is you're talking about, let's say it's 23 inches or 18 inches. It's taking that amount of water, 18 inches within a 24-hour period.
Right.
Okay, so also for the council and the public, DD6, haven't you entered into a contract with LAN to revise this study to take into account taking that much water? Is that true?
We have a contract with LAN looking at specific areas. not the entire city, but areas of interest to us.
So when they talk to the public, what's the number we ought to be looking at? As we design our infrastructure in the future, to take how many inches within a 24-hour period?
Well, they are the expert. Typically, you're looking at 18 inches, and you also have to keep in mind if you have another Imelda or another Harvey, you have to look at what's going to happen at this point. If you have an outlet for this excess water, great. If not, what can happen? So you have to mitigate the risk.
Yeah.
The less the risks, the higher the cost of the project.
So what he's saying is you have another Harvey or Imelda event, so everyone, let's get it out there. You can build infrastructure to accommodate taking that amount of water from those storms. Again, those are 2 storms in the top 10 in U.S. history since they started measuring these rainfall events. So just know DD6, City of Beaumont is not going to build out our infrastructure moving forward to take that amount of water.
You can't afford it.
That's exactly right. People need to know that. If you wanted to be able to do that, I mean, we would need to know. Well, the city would. They're their own governmental entity. But you're talking about astronomical costs to take that amount of water. No infrastructure that I'm aware of in the country is built to take that amount of water. Within, for sure, a 24-hour period, much less getting that much rainfall over, say, 3 or 4 days.
So the 277 million is built on the 14, is based on the 14, those 18 projects, and these aren't designed.
That's
They're
exactly
not
right.
funded. So I mean, we need to let people know that by September, we're not going to be able to have these done. I mean, I just want to be honest because, I mean, we're talking about a lot of money, and we'll have to prioritize, but they're not even designed yet.
That's exactly right.
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead, Councilman Samuel.
Go ahead, Alderman.
Now, tell me, did this study take into account those events that, is it my understanding that there can be varying amounts of rain falling in one particular area at a time?
Yeah.
So you can have 18 inches of rain fall in one part of the city, but not 5 or 6 in another.
Correct.
So did this study take that under consideration, or does that not address that?
So this study looked at uniform rainfall across the entire city. So this would be uniform rainfall happening everywhere at the same time.
Okay, how often is there ununiform downfall?
That's pretty common. It's to get perfectly uniform rainfall over 115 square miles is pretty rare.
Is there something that can, is there a portion of this study that can tell us where the most significant amount of rains fell over a time period per se?
You could do that with a gauge analysis. This study did not look at a specific gauge analysis of looking at, say, hotspots for rainfall within the city. But that could be done using gauge information from the DD6 gauge network.
So if you were prioritizing projects as you did on the study, in prioritizing, it did not take under consideration disproportionate amounts of rain that fall in particular areas.
It did not. No.
Overall. What about, did it also take under consideration populations of citizens or traffic volume? Was that considered in the study?
Those were not part of the ranking criteria. The projects could certainly be re-ranked against any criteria depending on the scoring desired.
So if that's a question as to the ranking so far has just been on raw information from the overall schematic of the city. If we were to take under consideration the others, we have no idea how that would move the ranking. Is that correct?
Correct.
But we do have access to, as you say, information that shows the largest amount of damage, both financially as well as structurally. We have that ability, and that could be used in the ranking.
Mhm.
Now, is that something that would change the scope of the overall study or change the direction that we would go in trying to address this, or is that something that we wouldn't want to consider?
I'd have to defer to city staff as far as the direction on how they would want them prioritized.
May I answer this one? It depends on the watershed area. The larger the watershed area.
Dr. Maz, you're on TV, and they're not going to be able to hear you, and so they're going to say, and they're going to want to hear you.
See, you're used to sitting over there.
Yeah.
And they can get you all the time.
It depends on the watershed area. The larger the watershed area, the less coverage you're going to have on it. Instead of having 100%, you may have less. Our watershed area in Beaumont is not very large, so the possibility of having 100% coverage is very likely.
Okay.
So that's why we took this approach to cover 100%.
Okay. Help me to understand fully. I'm not certain I understand watershed area.
Okay, like, for example, watershed in Beaumont area is divided into 3 areas. You have the
Okay.
Pine Island Bayou, drain toward Pine Island Bayou. You have another watershed drain toward the Neches River, and the largest is over Hillbrand Bayou, which is almost 55% of the city.
Okay.
So a small percentage goes to the Neches River, around 10%, and 55% of the city go toward the Hillbrand Bayou, and the rest of it go toward Pine Island Bayou and the lower parts of the
Can you
Neches.
show me, there was a map that had the 3 regions.
Mm-hmm. There was.
Can you kind of help me?
About page 10.
Here it
something
is.
like that.
Is this relevant to what you're talking about? the watershed?
Not quite. It's not quite.
So most of the water from region 2 goes to what watershed?
Probably, I'm going to guess right here, probably I'm going to say 25%, 30% of Region 2 go toward Hillbrand Bayou, toward Pine Island Bayou.
And the other percentage goes to?
And the rest of it goes down toward Region 3, and probably half of the yellow area go toward the river, the rest of it goes back to Region 3. The Region 3 is a large area. It goes to Hillbrand Bayou. And the level of service of Hillbrand Bayou is 25 year, 25, 27 year. Anything above 27 year, it's the Hillbrand Bayou will reach capacity. Is that correct?
That's correct.
What about the other 2, Neches and the,
It goes straight to the river. What I mean, it's and
So-
to the bayou. There's no restriction.
So
Hillbrand Bayou is trapped.
There's no restriction, and that,
That's correct.
okay, it doesn't matter what volume,
Correct. It goes toward the river.
okay.
I have a question. I mean, it seemed like the majority of our city is being routed to Hillbrand Bayou, 55% of it. Is there any way it could be distributed equally or take the pressure off of Hillbrand Bayou?
Part of the agreement we have with LAN is to look at certain areas. Hillbrand Bayou is at capacity. The only way you can help this area, you cannot deepen the Hillbrand Bayou, you cannot widen it, there's restrictive right of way. The easiest way to do is take it to the Neches River. And so diversion is another way to handle the situation. Project like this, you're looking at close to $75 to $100 million each project. Calder is, example, cost $66 million. This was 15 years ago. Now, this project is 15 years later, the price, construction cost, labor cost, material costs went up. So it's going to be probably around $100 million each project. We're applying for grants, and we're looking at either possibly 1 or 2 diversion. They're studying the area to see where best to intercept Hillbrand Bayou and divert some of the water to the Neches River.
Councilman Getz.
Thank you. This is for Lan, and it follows up on what Dr. Magellani just said. We have been looking at ways to try to get more water to the Neches River for a while now, and we recognize what a success the Calder project was in moving large volume of water to the Neches River. Even in recent heavy rainstorm events, Calder remains passable, and you can get from downtown to the west end along that road. None of these projects that I looked at, maybe I missed it, really suggest a super project like the Calder project, do they? Where you would take, I mean, it'd be a huge project, but for instance, if you were to take a street that goes pretty much the east-west length of the city, such as Delaware or something like that, and to do a project similar to Calder, where you put in these big 7x7 concrete boxes, how would that help with our flooding situation, or could that be done?
Depending on where, it would certainly improve that. Some of these recommended projects do have some fairly large storm sewer systems on the scale of Calder. They're maybe not as straight or as immediate to divert water between watersheds, but there are some of these projects that are quite large with that similar diversion in mind.
Do they go to the Natchez, or do they go?
They do go to the Natchez.
Okay. Can you show those projects again? And I know we're not going to spend a lot of time on, microanalysis of projects, but which would be an example of a project like that?
1B would be an example, right there, kind of in the middle of the page. There are portions of that are large diversions to the river. 1C also goes to the Natchez, and then 1G and 1F also divert off to the east at a smaller scale.
Okay. Could you go to the page that shows the projects listed on a cost-benefit analysis basis?
I don't have the cost-benefit table. I have the prioritized.
There you go.
But
Okay.
wasn't that the heaviest weighted, was cost-benefit?
Cost-benefit was the heaviest.
Right.
Okay.
Right, okay. So with all the criteria, these are the proposed project rankings, 1, 2, and 3. And I looked at these, and as you can see, there's one in each section for the top 3 projects. And those 3 projects were ranked based on a cost-benefit basis and other factors as to which would basically give us the most bang for our buck, right? Okay. So those top 3 projects, if I added correctly, are estimated to come in at about $22.5 million. Does that sound right?
I would need to check the math on that.
Okay, well, let's assume that I can add that. And, all of these together is $270 million, which, they say, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. But, if we're going to start trying to do something and use your criteria of the proposed project ranking, it would seem to me that the first 3 projects would be where we would start. It does provide relief to all areas of the city, all quadrants, and I think that might be an approach that we need to consider. But I also noticed that in all 3 of these projects, they all involve detention ponds in some capacity. Is that correct? Okay. Now, and I see DD6's seal here at the bottom, and I'm glad DD6 is participating in this study with us, and I'm hoping that when it starts coming to things like detention ponds, and DD6 has historically been the one that takes the lead on something like that, that we can collaborate with DD6 and partner with them so that we can make this more financially manageable for both entities. Of course, the city of Beaumont, 71 cents of $100 of valuation right now is what you spend to the city of Beaumont. And that not only includes drainage, it includes police, fire, libraries, parks, everything else. Yeah, and streets. DD6, 22 cents of every valuation, that goes to DD6, and their focus is drainage. So, Joe, I'm inviting you. In fact, I might even suggest having a joint meeting with the council and your board to talk about some of these projects and try to figure out how we can go forward on some of these projects.
To bring you up to speed, we applied for several grants. We already have 8 in the pipeline, and 6 out of the 8 grants we have are inside City of Beaumont. So we have a lot of projects inside the city. One thing I want to caution you, the price in right here, $22+ million, based on 13.8 inches, 14.8 inches. If you go back and rerun the numbers, all these storm sewers and the detention capacity has to be increased. So the 22 may increase by additional maybe 20-25%. So DD6, like I said, we have another consultant also looking at hopefully getting a grant for a project to look at Pine Island Bayou, Taylor's Bayou, and Hillburn Bayou. There's some interaction whenever you have heavy rains, they cross boundaries. And a lot of project in the pipeline, and we have a lot of project. We're fixing to start construction on it, so you're going to see a lot of activities. So we're excited about all these projects.
So,
We have met with the Public Works Director a few times. We sharing ideas, sharing studies, so we're on the same page. I want the public to know that we're talking, we're on the same
Yeah.
page.
yes, absolutely. So as far as, what we were talking about here, I just want to go back because I was listening to what Councilman Samuel was saying. This ranking that we have in front of us is based on, because I thought he said cost benefit, and you said no, but it is cost benefit, right? Okay, I misunderstood then. So that is the heaviest ranking on this?
Yes.
Okay. And then what else? Remind me, please.
It's cost benefit, overall project cost, and then impassable intersections made passable.
Oh, for roadways.
transportation.
Roadways, right, okay. All right.
The cost benefit was a 70% factor. Okay.
Yeah, it was weighted heavier.
And in those items, the prioritization could be re-ranked depending on feedback and criteria.
Right.
So those percentages could be changed. The raw data is available. Other items could be added to or subtracted from that prioritization process.
Okay.
So-
Councilman Getz, while Matt and Joe are both up here, it's unusual the relationship that the city and DD6 have. It's certainly in a study, in a master plan study, we don't necessarily say it's going to always be that way. But as of right now, unless I'm incorrect, DD6 would do most of the detention on these projects. So I think that's a real plus, and it's something that maybe needs to be stated, that it's unusual, the quality of relationship.
And I appreciate that, because if you're, and I don't know how anybody else up here is going to feel about any of this, obviously, but if we were to go through with the first 3 projects as the first projects, it would be important to have a breakdown, obviously, as to how much the city's going to actually have to pay and how much DD6 would be willing to contribute. Because without knowing that, we really don't know how much money we need to either raise in the form of a tax increase, or if we need to put it out for some sort of a bonding. We need to know that.
We're working on that. Our staff has been meeting with DD6 on a regular basis, and there's two things you need to know at this time. One, after Harvey, federal government appropriated money, about $2.1 billion the state of Texas has, for about, I think it's 46, 47 counties. But so the city of Beaumont can submit applications for funding, I think between $3 million up to $100 million. That's what we're being told. You can submit 3 projects. We can submit 3 projects by ourselves. We can submit up to 3 projects with a partner, such as DD6. So we're working together to determine what projects should we submit, which first we'd have to come to the council. What projects would you want to move forward with? And the key question is, how do you pay for it? If you go that route, still working on what the percentages, the matches might be. And there's some formulas where there's grant money, and also you can get a loan. I mean, it hadn't all been stipulated yet. We're still waiting for some of the details. So if you look at that, that's a number of years it's going to take to work through that process. okay? And then over here, you could borrow, you could issue debt, certificates of obligation is what we normally do. You can issue debt. That just competes, as you know, with the street rehab program, any street projects you may want to do. What drainage projects do you want to do?
Sewer.
And then, you know, we're going to get to it here in the budget process here in the next 30, 60 days. But you have potential tax increases before you to pay for our labor agreement with the police department, 3.5% due October the 1st. There's just a lot, meaning what I would do is wait and see what we come back with. And I know you're not ready to today, but don't commit to anything right now, because any potential tax increase on the operating side of our budget and then issuing debt, it all goes together, right? You know, if you increase taxes, your tax rate is 71 cents. So just let's just wait another 30, 60 days. You'll know a lot more where we are financially. And
Because of COVID,
we've been
too.
working with
Yeah.
DD6 on these projects. There's a lot more to do, and we'll be able to come back at a future date. And they can, you know, in greater detail, you ought to know what are the projects they've submitted for. And then if we're gonna work together, which we are, you don't wanna take more money to Hillebrand right now. I mean, take more projects, or water, I should say. You don't wanna take more water to Hillebrand necessarily until they make some changes. You probably wanna look at bringing water, if you're gonna do anything in the immediate future, bring more water to the Neches River or possibly Pine Island Bayou. So there's a lot to talk through. I know we're hitting you with this is just an overview. There's a lot more work to do, a lot more analysis, and we need to have more of these work sessions, but for longer periods of time, to really get down to the meat of some of these projects. And again, how would you pay for them?
Mr. Hayes, you said that there's applications for funding available, 3 for the city by itself and 3 for the city with a partner. So there's a total of 6 available. Okay. And when you talk about applications for funding, can you talk to me a little bit more about what that is? Is that a grant? Is that something that we have to pay a portion of?
That's what we're working through. We're working with a group called Public Management that's helped us before, and they're trying to determine what the who, what, when, where, why is, and what the exact percentages may be. And again, that's a wide, when you can apply for a $3 million up to $100 million, you know, what are the stipulations? What are the match requirements? We're trying to determine what all of those answers are. We really don't know at this point.
So they put
the
the
way
money
this
out
thing
there.
works, and y'all know after all these hurricanes we've had, and then, you know, going back to, you know, Rita and then Ike and then Harvey, and then we all know about Imelda, but this is related to Harvey money. And again, I'll repeat myself from a couple weeks ago. They're quick to announce the
That's what I was
funding's
gonna say,
there,
yeah.
but then it takes a long time to know what the rules of the game are.
So the money's basically been put out there for that this money is gonna be available from Harvey, but we don't know, they haven't put out what the match will be, what kind of
Do
projects
you know any
can.
greater criteria? 1% is what they're telling us, 1% match, which is fantastic.
Yeah, that is.
And then there are possible loans you can apply for as well. And, you know, that's a possibility as well. But a 1% match would be terrific.
You know, this is great news, and I want to compliment Lan and Mr. Chica, all your partners that worked so hard on this. And I know government moves slowly at times. It just does. But the very worst thing that we could do is to have spent $1.9 million on this study and then let it sit there and not do anything with it. And I know we're not planning to do that, but I do encourage us to have regular updates, frequent updates, to let not just us know, but to let the citizens know what their money has paid for and what we're going to be doing with it. The other thing I'd like to see us do is make this study available online along with the exhibits so that the citizens can look at it themselves. I've already had people wanting to see this, and is that possible that we can do that?
We'll put as much out there as we can. As you know, that binder's about this thick. So
Well,
as much as we can, and no, that's a summary. But
that's the summary? Okay, so,
I do want to say thank you to the council and previous councils for approving this, for trusting staff to make the recommendation we did with LAN and Chica. As you can see, they know what they're talking about. Very fortunate that we utilized them, and we know we can work with them in the future. It's been a great relationship, and it's going to continue. And with DD6, we're going to make progress. Just don't want the public to think it's going to happen overnight, because it will not. In best case scenarios, it will take years to get that funding probably approved. By the time you get it approved and then you can start designing a project takes, depending on the scope, a project just to design it will take 8 months to 2 years at least. That's just the way it works. And then by the time you get approval, design it, and start construction, you're going to be 3+ years down the road minimum.
And that's the point I was
don't
trying
want
to make on
anyone-
design.
Some people have already
yeah.
started talking about what we're going to do in quick order. That's not going to happen.
So with that said, if like a design, like say we find out that, how long would the design, I mean, on just one of these typical projects, I mean, just the design is what?
1 year to 2 years.
Yeah.
Just look at the pump station that you all just approved, and that's a big project.
And I wanted to bring that up too. Just because we're saying we can't start any of these right now, that doesn't mean we haven't been have other projects regarding drainage.
Exactly.
And I mean,
That's a
it's
good
not
point.
like
I'm
we're
glad-
starting from scratch
That's
here.
right.
This is just something new that we think will.
DD6 has made tremendous improvements over the last 10, 15 years. The city of Beaumont has as well. Just to throw out the Calder project again, $60+ million project. We're doing ongoing improvements all the time. That's small stuff. DD6 is doing much larger projects, because that's what they do every day, 100% of their job. So they ought to speak to what they've done in the last 3 years. I mean, they've done a lot and continue to. It's just.
I just want to make the point that we're not starting from scratch.
No, we're not. It's just.
It might seem like it. It feels like it, but.
The unfortunate thing is you have those two storms, and not making excuses, it is what it is. They've been tracking this stuff for about 100 years. So 2 of the wettest storms on record, Harvey and Imelda. Okay, so we know it happens. It could happen again this year. It could happen next year. So we need to be mindful of that. At the same time, you cannot correct those sizable rainfall events. You know, if they were to happen again tomorrow, we're not going to be able. We'll do the best we can, but we've never built out our infrastructure and our forefathers and going back. You can't take that much water. So I don't want the public to think it's going to be a quick fix. It will not. We're going to do the best we can and pay for the projects that we can, and continue to make incremental progress.
okay, so I understand, Mr. Manager, what you're saying. I'm not going to go grab a shovel and start digging tomorrow. We're not going to do that. But I would like to go back to the projects, the page that has all of the projects on it.
That one?
That's the one
No,
that's up, I believe.
the map with
That one.
that one, yeah. Okay, so the top 3 projects that you ranked, and I'm doing this because y'all are here, and I want to just ask a couple of questions. 2B, 1E, and 3A. Would you be in a position right now that you could give us a high-level overview of what those three projects would be, just the high points.
What was the numbers on them?
2B, 1E, and 3A, because those are the top three that they have, ranked.
Let me exit the presentation and look through some of my notes, and I can get you the high points on that.
Okay, thank you.
While he's working on it, I'd like to answer Mr. Getz's request. He requested participation from DD6 on some of the project. Over the years, we had great relationship between the city and DD6, and DD6 built up quite a few impressive projects right here. Our operating budget is somewhere between $21, $22 million a year, and it covers a large area, 55% of Jefferson County and Nome and China and Fayette area and Northwest Forest, and City of Beaumont is only 1/6 of our coverage area. $22 million doesn't go too far. What drive our capital program is the grants. The more grants we have, the more projects we have. Like I said, we have several projects. The city can apply for 3. We can apply for 3. Jointly, we can apply for 3. So a lot of projects. All these projects has to compete against some other project too. They're not going to just give it to you. So we hire the best engineers. One of the reasons we hired LAN, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We can use them. They design the master drainage plan. They can build up on this master drainage plan. So we have the best team right here, and also we have the best team at DD6. We're going to work together to come out with good projects. And I had Karen. She had to leave. Karen.
She's still here.
She's behind you.
She just moved.
She's here. She's helped us with our grant, and she's a pretty instrumental of getting grants for the district. The district over the last 10 years or so, we spent over $132 million. So this is pretty impressive. So they've done quite a few projects.
Councilman Councilman Pate, I'm sorry, you were next.
Oh, thank you. Well, a couple of things. Kyle, didn't we just recently close out, right at the end of closing out Hurricane Ike funds?
Yes, sir.
Which was
it took us 11 years to get fully reimbursed and close out that fund after the back and forth of reimbursements from FEMA. Just remember that 11 years, Hurricane Ike.
That's why I want everybody to kind of keep that in mind. We got Hurricane Harvey, we had Imelda. One of the great things about initiating this study was we initiated it before both of them. And when you looked at it from the standpoint, and correct me, as though we had a 100-year storm, 14, almost 15 inches over the whole city, so that you could evaluate if the whole city got 15 inches, hypothetically, here's the projects that would benefit the city the most because it would have the most dramatic impact on the city, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that's how you prioritize them based on our cost-benefit analysis. As though the whole city got 15 inches, which would be the only way to do it, because as we all know, we stood in our neighborhood and see it pouring down rain 2 blocks away, and we're looking straight up at the sun. I'll never forget my little brother when Robert running in, he couldn't figure out why it was raining and the sun was still shining at the same time, but he was 6 years old. But that's, as our friends Patrick Bond and Greg Boswick and those guys tell us, when it was pouring down in one part of Beaumont, it wasn't even raining in the south end. I mean, that's just how it is. But the great thing is we have this information and can move forward on it. We didn't wait till after Imelda and after Harvey to go, well, we probably ought to take a look at this. But we want everybody to keep in mind that when we're talking about tens of millions of dollars, sometimes hundreds, and you're talking about the government and how they may work with us, it takes a long time for them to lay out all the rules on how we're going to do it and when we're going to do it. And when you guys were doing your projections, as Mr. Ford said, most cities don't have the kind of relationship that we have with DD6. So they don't factor in, your drainage district will probably pick up some of this, They just assume, here's the numbers, we're gonna leave it up to you guys to work it out, because most of them don't have the kind of relationship that we have. And I appreciate Russ Ford pointing that out, because it is unique. Otherwise, they'd be factoring into every one of their projects, go, I know your drainage district's gonna take care of you, and then they find out they don't. In our case, they do, and so we're really fortunate there. But I think that the information that we've gotten is really something that's gonna pay dividends for us in the long haul. It's not gonna quit raining in Beaumont 100 years from now. Now, hopefully we won't get any more 100-year floods between now and the next 100 years, because we certainly got our percentage so far. That 1%, what's the chances of it being twice in 2 years? But it was. So hopefully we might need to get the bishop come in and do a little prayer before he retires, because when he prayed that last time, we didn't even have any H words coming through the Gulf that particular summer. But we appreciate the great job that you've done, and I know that we're going to be able to take this information and utilize it for our citizens. But as Kyle said, and Dr. Magellani, it takes a while for all of this stuff to come together. Just be patient with us. It's not that we don't want it to move faster. 12 years ago, we had Hurricane Ike, and we just wrapped that up. So what we're trying to do is plan ahead. Prior planning prevents poor performance. I saw that somewhere. But again, this is a great foundation. You got to know where you are before you can plot out a program. And this certainly tells us where we are and what we need to do and what we can do. And I appreciate it. Thanks.
Okay, Councilman Samuel Mouton Hill.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Manager, from what correct me if I'm incorrect, just because we're talking about the projects in this study and moving forward with them, we're talking about it's going to take some time. That does not mean that we don't have projects going that would impact particular areas that we're experiencing problems now. Is that correct or incorrect?
Our staff's working 5 days a week on trying to improve our maintenance, try to improve the infrastructure that we have. The Washington Boulevard project's under construction. That's a capital project that includes, drainage. So we're making improvements as it relates to what you alluded to, these projects identified on the screen. Those are going to take a lot of time. So we'll have to come back to you at some point and ask you which ones you want us to make application for funding, or do you want us to go on our own and borrow money, say through certificates of obligation, which is what y'all do every 2 or 3 years when we issue debt for street projects, drainage projects, general improvements. So you have those two options right now.
But you still couldn't do all of them with that. Yeah.
Let me kind of restate my question or my lack of understanding. So even though the projects we would have to look at design, we'd have to look at funding, all of those things for those particular projects that were mentioned in the study. That would be for doing new drainage projects.
Some are new and some are enlarging infrastructure that you have.
Okay. That does not mean we're not doing ongoing maintenance to the existing plans or to the existing system to increase its capacity in those systems. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So we are doing ongoing work to increase capacity to get water out to the various watersheds.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure that was clear, because there are some people that are experiencing unique problems in certain areas, and we're already addressing them, but these new projects could give further relief to those areas that's specified on the graphs.
Yes, sir.
Absolutely. Councilman?
Thank you, Mayor. You made mention of a gauge analysis which would show where flood insurance took care of a particular area, correct?
We did look at repetitive losses, which would help inform previous flood insurance losses. The gauge analysis could potentially identify hotspots of particular rain events, but looking at it from a worst case rainfall getting everywhere uniformly is the more conservative way of evaluating ponding.
Okay. So will that be used in any of the new plans going forward? Or is it being used?
The gauge analysis or the rep
Yes.
loss?
Both.
Well, the repetitive loss information helped guided the projects, so that guided where the projects were located. So they were guided that way. The gauge analysis is not something that's been undertaken for identifying particular hotspots, but typically design is more uniform rather than looking at a singular hotspot within a city.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilman Neal?
Thank you, Mayor. I typically would have had a lot more questions, but I had the opportunity to spend about 4 hours with my friendly neighbors over at DD6 on Friday. So I want to say thank you for that. But a couple of things that I would like Dr. Majdalani to help explain for us is kind of the difference or where DD6 picks up versus the city of Beaumont. Because there's a lot of areas in Beaumont that we're seeing flooding that it's just simply because the DD6 ditches can't keep up. And so I want to make sure the citizens understand where that line is in different parts of town, so that everybody has a better understanding of that. If you don't mind, Dr. Joe.
I'm going to ask Dr. John on this one here. Hillbrand Bio and Taylor's Bio, these are the largest conveyors. We inherited this from the Corps engineers. They built them way back then and turned them over to DD6 to maintain. There are large ditches too. All the closed pipes in the city is maintained by the city of Beaumont. Small ditches up to 4 feet or so is maintained by the city. We take over the large infrastructure mainly. To answer your question, we had 6 inches in an hour and a half the other day. Our ditches still have capacity in them. The water could not get fast enough to our ditches. We had probably 1 foot to 2 feet extra capacity. The design criteria at the city over the years has changed. If you look at catch basin, some of the street, they don't have any catch basin. Where Mr. Hayes lived, his street does not have any catch basins. The water flow from North Circuit all the way to South Circuit, no catch basins. The new design criteria the city is considering is shrinking this spacing. So you have more catch basins that can intercept the water in the street and move it into the pipes, from the pipes into the large ditches. So the city is always looking at modifying their system. We have capacity. The water need to get into our system. If it can't get to our system, so again, 6 inches in an hour and a half, this is uncalled for. This is a 100-year event for an hour and a half. So this is a lot of water in a short period of time. There's no design can handle it. Again, I want to make sure people understand that the streets are part of the drainage system. Your pipes and your catch basins can carry up to 10% of the rain event. The remainder of the rain event, the 100-year rain event, it has to be carried within the street. You cannot feasibly design a large enough system to carry 100-year in a pipe. That's not the design. It's everywhere across the United States. It's not only in Beaumont. It's a common practice. You carry the smaller event in the pipe, and the large event is carried by the street. So when the street is flooded, this is part of the drainage system.
That's a really good point, because a lot of people send us photographs of their street.
Doug, did I miss
Mine
something?
was too. And that was in bands too.
Yes, ma'am.
I mean, we didn't see some in some parts of town, but we saw a lot in other parts of town, like close to us, Taylor. We had a lot, but and you just never know. But I didn't ever really know about the streets being part. I didn't know that.
That brings me to, I've got 3 or 4 questions I want to ask. But going off that last statement that you just made, how the streets are part of our drainage system. As you know, we have done a lot of asphalt overlays in the city of Beaumont. which raises the level of the street.
Not
And-
necessarily.
Well, yeah, it kind of does.
You remove the pavement and you mix the pavement and you add pavement. At some instances, maybe inch and a half, if this much.
So it raises the question that I've been asked, and I've also wondered, if you raise the level of the street, which is part of the drainage system, are you in some way compromising the ability of the street to be part of the drainage system when you raise the level of the street?
Well, the design criteria is 5-10 years in the pipe, the curb 50, and all the way to the right-of-way is your 100-year. You can carry water up to 100-year within the right-of-way, city right-of-way streets. I can talk on DD6, and I'll let the staff right here talk about the city criteria. Yes, it could. I mean, if it's open ditches, it's not going to affect it too much. If it's curb and gutter, it might affect it, but so.
Well, what about when you don't have catch basins like in the circuit area, and you raise those streets, which we recently did?
Again, it depends on the design of the street. It depends if the street is slope on the streets. Every street is different. Some of them flat, some of them at certain grade. So
You're right. Some streets are built up higher, right? They are. Some are not. Depends on, like he said, how far you go down and how much new base did you put in. Remember, you got beat up because when we did an overlay on Magnolia, Delaware, you have the gutter line, right?
For bicycles.
Y'all got beat up. Hey, you can't ride my bicycle there. Well, it's not designed for bicycles, that roadway, right? It's not. So, but you did have that gutter line. That's to help move water. I mean, that's the purpose. I mean, you have a big rain event, it's going to get into the lane of traffic, but that's why you have that gutter line. So, Joe's correct. I mean, and you're correct too. Some roadways are definitely, higher, no doubt about it. Some are the same, or some cases even lower. It depends on how extensive that overlay is.
Which, and I'm not throwing stones. I'm really not right here. I'm not anyway. What I am saying is that we all know that it costs less money to do an asphalt overlay than to dig everything out and start from where everything was originally. And I think we need to be mindful when we do that of how it could impact the ability of the street to convey water as part of our flood program.
We agree.
Okay.
Just so you know, staff goes and analyzes that. They look at how bad is the base material. When was it, when was the last time we touched it? What was it built with? And different parts of this city are different as well.
Right.
And we have different,
The other thing, three other things. Mr. Hayes, you and Councilmember Salmon were having a conversation. I think you made this statement that we're doing maintenance, which would somehow increase capacity. As I understand it, and please correct me or help me understand, the capacity is already there. If we don't do maintenance, we're losing capacity. And if we just do the maintenance, then we're going to keep the capacity at its maximum rated amount as is, right?
Well, we do both. There may be some things you're not aware of. For example, staff's been out with you lately. Staff's been out with Councilman Neal lately. Staff's been out with Councilman Mouton. Let's take the, Blossom Drive, the ditch, the railroad ditch right next to your house. Our staff's working with, I think it's BNSF, the work we would do would increase capacity to help move the water. That's just one example. Councilman Neal's familiar. We just made improvements and expanded the capacity, put in a new catch basin right there by IDance. Is it IDance Rule? iRule. So we do that type work all over town. That's increasing capacity, helping the water, move the water. you know,
Well,
so-
is it,
So
but
it's
the
two
pipe,
things. So
the
you're-
pipes are already there, and they're only going to hold whatever the capacity is of the pipe. Taylor and I just walked through those last week, so, and I'm very happy to report that those pipes look clear. I mean, we're actually walking through the storm sewer system, and, you know, I think we went in over there by the Greenberg Theater. Councilmember Neal walked all the way almost to his house. You know, I bailed out a little past Calder when the pipes started getting it's pretty claustrophobic. But anyway, they're clear, and so you know, there's not a lot of obstruction in there. And thank you for letting us do that and providing Chase Mann to help us with that. I want to circle back to the 3 projects that I had asked you about, and if you could put them back on the screen, those 3. Could you give us just a mile-high overview of what those 3 projects would be?
So projects 2B and 3A are a combination detention basin and some minor or relatively minor storm sewer improvements relative to the others. 3A, given its location in Hildebrandt, is somewhat isolated, I'll say, from what we'd call a free outfall. So we don't want to send the problem at that part of Hildebrandt somewhere else. So 3A is looking at temporarily detaining some of that water on site during the peak of an event, provide some benefit. 2B is similar.
And before you, so again, for people that might not understand, we're detaining that water on site. Is it in the midst of the storm? It's going to fill up, and then it's going to be let out over a period of time so that it can go into the ditches and not overwhelm them.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, in this case, you're not diverting that water, you're not sending it to a new watershed or anything like that. You're temporarily storing it during the peak, providing some storage when the worst of the rain event would occur, and then letting it drain out slowly over time.
Okay. 2B?
2B is a very similar type improvement with detention and some conveyance to help fill some of that detention. There's several smaller storm sewer systems in that area that rely on a channel to drain, and so the detention basins would provide some relief to the channels, and then the channel would be slightly lower, so the storm sewer systems could operate in a better fashion.
And was it 1E?
Yeah, 1E is a little bit of a combination project. There is an existing DD6 detention basin that has some undeveloped property adjacent to it that could be expanded. And in addition to that, there is some proposed trunk line storm sewer system improvements. So that would provide some conveyance to that pond and also interconnect with some of the other storm sewer systems along its alignment. So that one's a bit of a combination project.
Thank you. And again, we would hope that DD6 would participate in some of these. And, you know, Mr. Manager, you said you're going to have to come back at some point. What kind of timetable are you thinking of to get guidance from council as to how we would like to proceed and finance this, whether it be through some sort of application for funding or through something that we fund ourselves? What's your timetable?
My staff can correct me, Todd, Bart, but we have to submit these projects to the state related to this community development block grant money again for Hurricane Harvey. We have to submit these projects by October. So, again, we're working with DD6 to see maybe what projects we can partner on, what projects we may want to go on our own, bring that to you, tell you what the match is. Let's say it's 1%.
So well, the next thing that we can anticipate is for you and your staff to come back with some recommendations?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And as we're going into the budget year too, so we'll be talking about our
Exactly.
finance.
It ties together. And when I said earlier we don't have all the answers, I mean, you don't. Every pot of money you go after, some, as you know, we've told you that, for example, like on the pump station was a little different from, remember the line, the transmission line from the pump station to the plant. That pot of money said you cannot expend any money, you cannot start design without it being approved, which we're still waiting for that approval. So we're trying to determine, could we move forward with the design before they approve it? Those are the type questions we're trying to work through and give you good answers when we come to you.
Mayor, this is a question for Matt. In making your determination on the projects 1 through 18, were you able to factor in the projects that DD6 is working on? And did that influence your decision at all on those top, let's say, 3 projects?
Yep, the DD6 projects were incorporated. Previous ones that had been done or ones that were nearing completion, they were incorporated and included in terms of the existing conditions, so they weren't being double counted or anything like that. So had those not been accounted for, it certainly would have influenced where those projects were located.
Thank you.
Good question. Okay. This might sound odd, but because I've lived here forever, but detention and retention, if you look at them, can you tell if one's detention and should be draining and one's retention and should be staying? As a
Well,
general,
you drive by. If you drove by one of these facilities and saw water in it,
I mean, I know where they
it's
are.
a retention pond, right?
Because we haven't had much rain.
So if you drive by like the soccer fields, that's a detention.
Okay.
I get confused with it too. But
Yeah,
it's-
well, I can, well, the terminology makes sense. It's just I didn't know which were which.
Well, and you may also have combination ponds where you have a wet bottom pond which retains water permanently, and it may be there for water quality considerations or something like that. And then the remainder of the pond, soccer fields or something, may be dry full time.
You had something, Dr. Madge?
Yeah,
Go
in
ahead.
Beaumont, we don't have any retention. All we have is detention.
Oh,
We got the pond at the event center.
That's right.
That's a retention.
And
yeah.
I know you've been as impressed with them as we have over the last 5 years. And just know you've hired them also on sewer study. And that first phase has been completed. So we're looking at entering into the contract for the second phase. And we're going to bring that to you as well, have a work session. This gentleman sitting right here will lead that work session. So again, y'all have approved a lot of good stuff that we keep telling the public. We put it on, Facebook, our website. But if you have a segment of the community that's not looking at it there,
They may not.
they may not be aware of it, or they may be getting their news somewhere else. So there's a lot y'all have approved, a lot of good stuff in the works, and we just got to keep moving forward and telling people about it.
So that was the study, the first phase.
It's a sewer study with
Yeah.
same type of, where
So
are your
there-
weaknesses, what are the challenges, and
So the projects that we have underway now, the pipe bursting, which is quite a bit,
yeah, I think
large
that
project,
over
that's
6 or 8 million.
That's not part of that study.
No, ma'am.
There'll be,
It's just a-
so that just shows that we're doing some things before the study comes, and yeah. Okay. Anything else, anyone? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Very
Appreciate it.
informative. We appreciate you. Thanks. We have another work session.
Got a lot going on. Thank y'all very much.
Thank you.
Mayor and Council, you want to move forward into the next one?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so the second work session is to review and discuss possible amendments to the 2019 Community Development Block Grant Action Plan, and Chris Boone is going to lead the work session.
Thank y'all. Bye. Thank you.
Good afternoon. The purpose of this work session is to review and discuss amendments to the 2019 CDBG Action Plan. And the purpose behind that is in response to COVID-19 pandemic. You may be aware the city was allocated a direct allocation of $801,000 in supplemental CDBG CV or COVID funding as a result of the CARES Act. Recipients were urged to use the funding for emergency response, which would include establishments of medical facilities, clinics, public testing, etc. However, the funds were also able to be used for response for the economic impact caused by job losses related to the pandemic. As we've moved through the regulations of this allocation, it's become clear to us that we do not need, at least at this time, the funding to be used for medical testing or medical facilities. And so we are proposing to use the funding for response to the economic impact of the pandemic. To that end, you may also be aware there are other pots of money, other sources of funding, some of those through Texas Department of Emergency Management, TDEM, Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs, TDHCA, as well as the Regional Planning Commission. They're also looking at different pots of funding for similar programs. But this direct allocation of $801,000 is CDBG, which is what we handle every year, and it does have the most discretion and the greatest control for the city. So again, we are proposing to use the funding in the following way. And again, in discussion with HUD, the quickest way to allocate these funds is to essentially amend the 2019 CDBG action plan. So this current year that we're working with. And we're proposing to allocate the funds in the following way. So with regard to the $801,000, we're proposing a utility and rental assistance program in the amount of $600,000. We're proposing to assist local food banks in the amount of $140,000. And then administrative expenses, whether it be for cities or through our nonprofit partners, in the amount of $61,000. Discussing the utility and rental assistance payment program, the city has partnered in the past with local nonprofit partners such as Henry's Place or Salvation Army to administer such programs. We did this back after the 2008 financial collapse. When we did a program called the HPRP, Homeless Prevention Rapid Rehousing Program. And what this does is it allows these nonprofits to use the funding to reimburse families for up to 3 months of utility and rental assistance. And again, the idea is if these families are at risk of becoming homeless because of the pandemic, they can hopefully tap into these utility and rental assistance payments. It's important, though, to point out that we estimate that, with the amount of the cost of rent and utilities these days at $500 to $1,000 a month, we may be able to help up to 500 households. It's also important to understand that there is an income test. It is a reimbursement program, so we will require that the nonprofits provide documentation that these families were at risk of becoming homeless, documentation that essentially the payments have been made. So again, it is a reimbursement program through those nonprofit partners.
Chris, does that mean that the nonprofit has to front the money and then they get reimbursed?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And so again, that would be the largest proposed use of the funding. The second proposed use of funding would be allocation of $140,000 to local food shelters. And again, the idea would be to distribute food to local families, as well as the administrative costs of doing that. And then finally, we are also recommending to amend the 2019 budget to not change the numbers in the public facility and improvement line item, but to specify that of the $500,000 in that line item, that $400,000 of that be dedicated to repair and enhancement of two of our local homeless facilities. You may recall that we had budgeted these funds to include the sewer line replacement program. Despite our efforts to market that program, it's been a little bit slow in terms of response. We have We have done analysis of several applications, but in many cases they may be renters, and so they haven't been eligible. So we're still working that program, and we're looking at other options where instead of it being a response-based program, we're going to look at maybe targeted areas where we know there are excessive numbers of sewer line issues in a certain area. So we're looking at maybe retooling that program in the near future. But in order to provide a more immediate response for the COVID pandemic, we wanted to allocate or request allocation of $400,000 of that $500,000 to, again, repair and enhancements of homeless facilities within the city. We have reached out to two of our partners, and the response we've got has been positive. Henry's Place, what they're requesting is a repair foundation, upgrade of electrical systems, upgrade of their kitchen facility, repair of siding and painting, and some floor repairs. And they're estimating that those improvements would be $266,000. And then Salvation Army, we reached out to them. They've got a facility at 1078 McFadden that has been essentially vacant for many years. And so what they're looking at doing is trying to reactivate that facility. But to do that, they are looking at doing some foundation repairs, painting some rotten woods, exterior roof repairs, drywall, floors, interior. The building official and I have walked those facilities. I think Councilman Getz has walked those facilities. And so they're not in that bad a shape, but the estimates we're getting is it's going to be about $200,000 to get that facility back activated. So we are recommending, again, $400,000 of that $500,000 public facility line items be allocated to shelter repair and enhancement. But again, with that, are there any questions about the proposal?
Sure.
The McFadden facility, what would that allow them to accommodate?
I don't have the exact numbers, but again, I think there are, an estimated maybe 15 to 20 rooms, and so the idea would be to house, basically shelter individuals at that location.
Mayor.
Oh, I'm sorry. Who was next? You were next. Go ahead.
On that facility on McFadden, I have been very involved in that, as has Councilmember Pate, and that used to be, for the benefit of the public, a homeless shelter that was last used in that capacity in 2004. It was shut down for lack of funding, continued to be owned by the Salvation Army. It was owned by the Salvation Army, and it's basically been in mothballs ever since then. It's persevered amazingly well, considering that it's just been stored. In fact, when I went in, it's like they walked out one day preparing to come back the next and just didn't. There's still sheets on the beds. There's beds there. There's pots in the kitchen. These facilities could be, with some TLC and some money, put and made operational very, very quickly. They are right there, catty corner to some other place. The Salvation Army wants to close their current shelter for homeless, and they want to make that into a boys and children's center, and boys club, girls club, and they want to shift their homeless shelter to this location. I'm all for it because I think that we have all noticed that the homelessness is continuing to increase here in Beaumont. Yesterday I visited with a church member from Pioneer Baptist Church, which is over on East Lucas, right across from the crossing. And I talked to you about it. And a homeless camp has actually been set up on church property in the tree line that they didn't even know about. And so they're trying to deal with that situation. But my question is, I know you're recommending $600,000 be put into a utility and rental assistance program. To me, that's kind of a Band-Aid. That is going to buy a little bit of time for people that aren't able to pay their utilities, maybe 1 month, 2 months. Could that money be, or some of that money, also be shifted towards the allocation for the facility improvement?
It could be. Again, we reached out to them and asked them, what do y'all need? And that's the response we got. Obviously, it's 266 and 200 is more than 400, but the higher number was at Henry's place. So that's the response we got. We do expect in the near future to come back to you with some possible additional reallocations. We have some funds that were prior years, and HUD's come back and said for accounting purposes they want us to kind of reuse some of these earlier funds, and so we expect that that's going to happen. You may recall the small business revolving loan fund. We still expect some funding to come back. So what I'm saying is we do expect some funding that we may come back to you in the near future to reallocate, which could be used to this. To your point, though, I think the idea behind this, and that's why so many jurisdictions are looking at tenant-based rental assistance, is it can be seen as a short-term fix or a Band-Aid, but if you're facing eviction or having the lights turned out, right. And so I mentioned like the other programs that are out there. We had some questions in I think last week or the week before about maybe the Regional Planning Commission having a program, but like all these programs, the rules are different depending upon which agency is assigning them and who's administering it, and so they're still trying to figure that program out. So if we feel like we can get this money out quickly, and so maybe that'll be a gap that.
Yeah, but you mentioned something that gives me pause and concern. It's a reimbursement program, and entities like some other place and the Salvation Army have been really affected with their charitable donations over this time. What if they don't have the money to loan out to people for utility assistance right now? If they can't start the process on the front end, it doesn't matter about reimbursement. So what about that situation?
And they'll know that, we'll know that, and they'll know that going in. The indication we've gotten is that they are prepared to do that. But again, we'll have to enter into a contract with them that they're prepared to do that. And I will say that like I mentioned, the HPR program many years ago. So we've done it before with them, and we feel like, we will process the reimbursements as quickly as we can. So we don't feel like it's going to be, yes, they will have to have the funding up front, but we don't feel like it's going to be a big, waiting process for them. As long as we can get the paperwork back in time, we will we'll get the funding to them.
Okay.
Anything else, Councilmember Mouton? I'm sorry. I think but either way, I'm having a hard time keeping up. I apologize.
That's okay. Also, Chris.
Yes.
That money, the $600,000 for the rental assistance and the utility assistance, that was under the CARES Act,
right. Correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Which is part of the stipulation of using that $801,000. That it could be used under the CARES Act to reimburse due to COVID-19 rental assistance and utility assistance.
Correct.
Which if we have people that's 3 months behind in their rent, they too will be homeless if there's not any assistance available.
Yes, ma'am.
To assist them.
Yes, ma'am. That's the idea, is that you're preventing homelessness by providing this funding.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Councilman Samuel?
Yes, I would like to express, I do understand and agree with maintaining those funds in the area of emergency assistance, helping to keep people from becoming homeless. Is there going to be still the $100,000 that will be still left in the line item for for water lines?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
And what are we doing now as far as advertising or letting people know that problem exists?
So we have, we've actually reached out to some churches and some local nonprofits in our areas to try to get the word out. We've reached out to some neighborhood groups to try and get the word out. The way the program was originally designed was it was going to be in response to city workers, city crews being out at a location, and we, the city, would determine it was not on the issue with the blockage was not on the city side, it was on the private side. And then at that point, they were going to do the direct outreach to that homeowner and say, oh, hey, by the way, the city has this program, can you please reach out to them? And that's how it has been working. Unfortunately, though, the applicants we've gotten have not met the criteria because either of income or they may be renters instead of homeowners. And so we do still have the program up and running. So if we had a valid applicant, we can move forward with that. But we're looking at retooling it, either changing the rules and or, like I mentioned, trying to identify some areas in low mod areas because, again, it's CDBG funding, but identify some areas where you may have several known issues with sewage lines, laterals, that instead of us waiting for the call, we go out to them and say, look, we know there's a line issue, an issue in 3 of the 5 houses on this block. We would like to replace them all at once. Of course, we'll get their permission and all that, but that's what we're looking at doing now.
Okay, so we're not eliminating the program.
No, sir. And again, we hope to have both.
And we're hoping to do a better job of making it aware, making residents aware that that is available to them.
Yes, sir.
Are we also, I do understand, but with the CARES Act, that is for immediate remedy for those who've been impacted by COVID-19 and to prevent homelessness. Now, we are still looking, I'm sure we're looking at ways of addressing our homelessness in our city. Are we are we considering what we're going to do in that manner? Because that could be the way that it be done by partnering with like Henry's Place or some other place or Salvation Army, those.
Right. So we serve on the Continuum of Care Committee, which is the Homeless Coalition Committee that's run out of the Regional Planning Commission. Mm-hmm. I know Councilman Pate, Councilman Getz have also started a kind of a separate committee, which there's a lot of overlap, but all with the idea of, how to address the homeless issue. So we are actively working with those partners to identify funding sources. We've reached out during this when we've seen maybe funding sources that the city cannot apply for, but we see maybe they're coming through the state. We've reached out to those partners and said, hey, have y'all looked into this? And so we are continuing those efforts to try and address that ongoing issue.
Okay. Yes.
Chris, I'm assuming that many of the houses that have problems, talking about the sewer line, that's not the city side, but their side, are going to be the older homes in Beaumont.
Yes, sir. Assuming
then that many of those will be renters. How do we get past the renter to get to the homeowner to make this program available to them? How do we get around that issue, and can we?
I believe we could make it.
Because it's the renter, I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's the renter that ends up suffering.
Correct.
And so they're the ones we're really trying to help. And how can we get past that issue?
Yeah, and the short answer is we are looking at the regulations to see if there's possibility to help through the renter. I guess the concern is, are we helping the landlord who really should be dealing with the issue because they're collecting rent. Mm-hmm. And so, theoretically we could go to the landlord, but again, we would be looking to see what is their income. Yeah. And it could be low mod, or chances are it might not be.
Is that all? Okay, so I just want to clarify, because we're talking about two different things here, and I know that the $801,000 got a lot of press basically through the CARES Act. So the recommendation is the $600,000 on the utility rental assistance and $140,000 to the food bank, which they're very much in need as well. The improvements that are being proposed to Henry's Place and Salvation Army come out of the CDBG funding, which is a separate funding source. for the 400,000 basically for them, and then the 100,000 will stay in that assistance for the people who have problems on their side. And first, I want to thank Chris for going on a conference call with me with several ministers in Beaumont, and we're very interested in all this. So I thought that I remembered you saying something on that call about the 100,000 that Councilmember Samuel was talking about that has the pipes on the people's side, how you were going to promote it in a different way that really appealed to me. I thought it was a very good idea. Did you mention that earlier and I just missed it?
Yeah, now I'm trying to remember what I said. But
Yeah, it was good, Chris.
It was good. Well, whatever I said, the upshot is that, to Councilman Feldshaw's comment and Councilman Samuel's, that we are looking at retooling the guidelines. We are looking at doing a little bit better marketing so that we can keep that response program, but also look at areas that we know have certain maybe blocks.
That's what it was.
A couple blocks, right? So you may have a couple blocks in a low mod area that we know they're having lots of problems with, and we may be able to go through. And it's possible there may be some renters in there that we may be able to do the whole block. As long as the general area comes under low mod, it would be an area benefit under the CDB guidelines.
That's what you had mentioned. I liked that a lot because there are some areas of town that have older pipes, and we might have repaired the city sides, but if theirs are bad from their side up, it's not going to do them a lot of good. So if we have a section like that we could use that for, I think that would be great. I thought that was a really good idea.
Well, and as you know, you may have 5 houses in a block, and if 3 have problems, that may not necessarily directly affect the ones that aren't, but if there's a flood event, that water intrusion may back up the common system, so now they may have a problem. So that's what we're looking at, is an area program, but keeping the response program, but maybe retooling it.
Right. Thank you. Councilmember Mouton.
Yes.
Thank you, Mayor. Chris, for the public that's listening, could you, or do you have a date when the utility and rental assistance will be
We do have an
available?
action item on that, so it's not, we haven't voted on it yet, but if you want to go ahead.
Okay, so the next step is, if approved under the action item today after the public hearing, what we would do is send this amendment to HUD in Houston and get their approval. Once we have HUD's approval, then we do have to enter into contracts with the nonprofit partners, and then a lot of it's going to be in discussions with them as to their finances and when is their start date. But the hope is to have it start as soon as possible. But
Hopefully by the end of the month.
Hopefully by the end of the month, but that may be aggressive, but that's our goal.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We appreciate your help, Chris.
Thank you.
Okay, so that concludes our work sessions. Now we have a public hearing.
Yes, ma'am. As a part of item number 4, which is to consider approving a resolution adopting the amended 2019 annual action plan, a public hearing is required, and it would be to receive comments on the amended public services and public facilities and improvements line items of the Consolidated Grant Program's 2019 annual action plan.
Thank you. Now would be the time for any citizen who would like to speak in this public hearing. The time to do so is now. As I mentioned before, we'd appreciate if you keep your comments to 3 minutes. The green light will come on when you approach the podium, and the red light will come on when your time is up. I will open up the microphone at the end of our meeting for any other general business, but this is for the public hearing regarding the CARES Act and the CDBG funding.
Mayor, I have 2 that would like to come at the same time. Vernon Tubbs, 3290 Pine Street, Beaumont, Texas, and Michael Cooper, 5040 Oakmont Drive, Beaumont, Texas.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Councilman. We're here today to comment on what has just been said pertaining to the residential assistance. And I had kind of something prepared, but y'all stole most of my thunder. So, but that's a good thing because of what you have already proposed to do. and we do appreciate it. But one of the other things that we had been aware of is that the JP who issued the eviction notices had tentatively set a date for June the 10th or the 15th to begin to serve those notices, June the 10th, which is tomorrow. And so with your approval of it, we noticed that you said you had to also go to HUD to get their approval. And I don't know how that could be expedited, but we're looking at tomorrow as a day to begin serving eviction notices. Now, I know that all of you, as well as myself, we're not concerned about evictions, but I may have family or friends or parishioners who may be concerned about evictions. And with that in mind, we would like to make sure that since you're in a position to assist and help them, that they would really appreciate whatever you can do. Now, we do have a real concern of constituents, faith leaders, as well as TMO, Baptist Ministers Union, and Reverend Cooper represents the NAACP. All of us are concerned about all of the community, not just the ones that looks like us, but all of the community. We're concerned about them being evicted and not being evicted from their homes. But whatever you can do to assist them, we certainly appreciate it.
Yes, sir. I might suggest that if the council passes this today, that you let the JP know. Maybe they'll back off a little bit, because we're going to get this done as soon as we can.
All right,
If it passes.
Mayor?
Yes.
I was going to ask our top-notch legal mind here, when they're served with evictions, what kind of time frame does the recipient of the eviction notice have before they actually have to leave? Just because usually it's not the next day, but this might give them a little cushion as far as time goes. Tyrone, are you aware of what that is?
I'm not familiar with what's happening in the JP courts relative to these, but I would think that after, if the council approves this, then maybe a copy of the resolution
To them.
the JP.
That's what I was suggesting. And we'll get you a copy of that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Appreciate
We just
it.
want to put their mind at ease that even though the JPs may start this process, that it's not, here's the eviction notice, you got 24 hours to get out. I think it's much longer than that. But just the worrying is what we want to alleviate for them, so that they're not concerned that when they hand it to them, they got to go, because they don't.
Right. Appreciate it.
I wasn't suggesting that. I was suggesting that we give it to the JP, not
Right.
necessarily to the person who's renting, because I think they might be amenable to give a little latitude. So they
right.
don't have to go through that. But thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you a lot.
Two pastors, thank y'all very much for working with our staff and working with Mayor Ames especially to make this happen.
Yeah,
All right.
appreciate
Appreciate
it.
it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's all I have, Mayor.
Okay, so that concludes our general business. Oh, no, we've got item number 4. It's an
Yes,
action
ma'am.
item.
Mayor and Council, item number 4 is to consider approving a resolution adopting the amended 2019 annual action plan. The administration recommends approval.
Thank you, council. Is there a motion on this item?
Move to approve.
There's a motion and a second on the floor. All in favor, please. I'm sorry, is there any other discussion? We've had quite a bit. Okay, if there's no other discussion, all in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries unanimously. I'll now move to public comment. Now's the time for any citizen who wishes to speak. If you would like to make a comment today and you haven't already done so, please fill out the green slip and hand it to the officer. We will call out your name. And as I mentioned earlier, we would appreciate if you keep your comments to 3 minutes.
Linda Pete Gilmore, 1350 Long Street, Beaumont, Texas.
Yes, ma'am, please come forward.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
My name is Linda P. Gilmore. I live at 1350 Long Street here in Beaumont, Texas. I came out today to show y'all the picture of my home from the Harvey storm. Glow is building me a new home. But 2 weeks ago, look at the water in my yard. I've been complaining since the Harvey storm for drainage, and I have no drainage. The Glow Company have built a new home. On your list, you showed Long and ML King, number 1 to be built, drainage. So I guess I talked to Mr. Lancaster, I talked to Mr. Remington, Miss Molly, she never returns my calls. And I've been complaining. I have pictures go low showing the drainage, the water, land in my new home. I have not moved in yet. I haven't moved in it. The Glow Company is the government building those homes on piers. They've raised my grass, they've raised the land, but no drainage. And everybody come out, they take pictures, and that's it. But nobody come back and help with that drainage. This 2 weeks ago,
yes,
I flooded with the Harvey, and I've been out my home. I'm not in my home yet. So please, y'all go to 1350 Long Street and see the water that was laying in my yard. It's a beautiful home they building. The government is building some beautiful homes for us. But the drainage, the city is not helping. The contractors have called the city, talked to the city, coming up about to do the drainage, for the water to stop laying in the yard. They tell them they coming. Everybody come out and take pictures, but then they all go. Nobody come back. So please, is there any kind of way that I could get that drainage? Because they couldn't put my driveway cement in because of the drainage. So Mr. Remington told him that he's going to come back and finish the end of my driveway because I told him I don't want those rocks laying in my driveway. The government said they were building a brand new home with cement. Here's pictures of it. That's the grass. This is where they're building the house.
Yes,
That's
ma'am.
the new home.
If you will, at the end of the meeting, will you see Mr. Hayes right there?
Ms. Gilmore, thank you for being here.
Yes.
See that gentleman in the back with the blue shirt?
We've already talked.
All right, he can go out, or his staff, and
Figure out
meet
what's
you
going on.
at your house and talk through how can we help you possibly, okay?
Please, 'cause
so
that's
he's the guy that can, if you'll coordinate with him, we'll definitely meet you out there.
Please.
And try to help you.
Thank you
Thank
all.
you,
Have
Ms.
a blessed day. God
too.
bless each and every one of you.
Thank you, Ms. Gilmore.
Yes, ma'am.
When they put homes in, don't they have to put drainage in with it?
Well, it's supposed to drain to the street. Your lot is.
But it's,
And so I don't know the particulars in this case, but Bart probably does.
Okay.
And some of the staff that she named should know what's going on, but we'll try to figure out what's going on and help you.
Please, thank you.
Luther Martin, 6955 Broadleaf Drive, Beaumont, Texas.
Nice wipe down. My name is Luther Martin, like you said, and I'm here to express some displeasures and concerns. I call them my DCs, and it doesn't mean District of Columbia, because I don't want you to wait for the District of Columbia. I want you to put some action in place now called fast tracks. I'm going to start off with a quote. Evil prevails when good men and women remain silent and do nothing. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. Colin Kaepernick kneeled before God, America, and the flag in an effort to get black lives included in America's promise. How many of you have kneeled before God to ask to have a bitter cup removed? 401 years later, blacks are still asking for systemic racism to be removed. I used to think that all the racist people will die off one day and leave the one with pure hearts. I am here today understanding that God have no hands but our hands to do his work today. We have to stop making excuses and do the work of the Lord. And I'm going to outline some things that I've ran across in my experience, and I hope I don't run out of time. Police reform. We can do some of these things now and not wait on the District of Columbia. Remove from police training and arsenal the choking hold and applying the knee to the neck. And also the drug raids without notifications. Make it a crime for those things. Make internal investigation of the police and sheriff department a separate entity. Promote new culture among peace officers where they will move from a philosophy of we must protect our own to one that we must protect all. No more negative peer pressure. A friend of mine was in the police department and was on the job, knew within the first year. And that peer pressure came on him. And he had stopped the older officer for doing something like chokeholds or whatever. And when he did, he was returned with peer pressure. And the guy came in his office and said, hey, look, the chief.
How much more time do you need, Mr. Martin? Just go ahead and finish real quick if it's not too long.
Okay, I'll cut through some of it.
Okay.
But the peer pressure was that the chief said he wanted to know whether this guy was with him or not. And the guy told him, said, no, don't you tell me that. Have the chief to tell me it. Matter of fact, I go to the chief office and asked him. But the gist of my comment was the Beaumont police chief didn't handle his statement correctly. Because in the 8-second video, you do not need any more video to explain the knee to the neck that will kill that individual just like it killed George Floyd. So we need to come up, what he should have done was come up with a plan saying, I'm going to remove that from his arsenal and do something about it. Other things like the DA reform. We got crooked DAs, and we need to do something about it. Like the one in Louisiana, the DNA evidence released this guy, and he wouldn't release the guy because he probably was a racist. All right. Other things like the jury panel. Here's a statement when I was in a jury pool.
Mr. Martin, are you almost finished?
I'm going to say this one and I'm going to go.
Okay, thank you.
All right. In that jury pool, this white woman said to me, Luther, referring to the defendant, said, this guy got to be guilty. He's black. Nobody born a racist, but these actions are taught, indoctrinated, and learned. They're in the police department because of the fact that skinheads and Ku Klux Klans have infiltrated our police departments all over the world.
Thank you, Mr. Martin.
Grace Mathis, 150 North 7th Street, Beaumont, Texas.
Hello, my name is Grace Mathis. I am a born and raised Beaumontian, and I've worked in many capacities in this community. I actually started out moving back here after school and worked at the Southeast Texas Food Bank for 4 years, working and developing the backpack program at the food bank. I was a teacher for 1 year at Peach MacArthur Elementary School, and I'm an active artist and performer and very active in the local arts community. So I am here as a resident and a concerned citizen to say that, well, first of all, thank you all for your service. Thank you for your commitment to all the citizens in this community. What our society is experiencing in America is, it's a long time coming. And so I am here to ask the City Council and the City of Beaumont to begin to look at ourselves, look at how we have done things before, and realize that it is time to change. It is time to examine the city budget, where the funds are appropriated, and to reflect on what brought us to the point where we have the video that has surfaced of the 17-year-old being pushed down by the police, and the subsequent response from the police union, and Chief Singletary acknowledging that the police will no longer be using certain types of chokeholds. When I saw that, I thought, well, would that have happened if this video had not surfaced? Would this have been addressed within the police department if there was not public outrage surrounding that incident? And we'll never know that. But it is time for our community to talk to the police department, to hear from the police department, and to know what do they have in place to make sure that police are handling their interactions with the public in a respectful way. And I think it's also time for us as a community as a whole, including the City Council, to re-examine how much of our funding that we have in this community goes to specifically the police department, and how much of that could be reallocated to those things that will prevent crime from happening in the first place. Things such as public transportation. I was very happy to hear this discussion about homelessness and how that can be addressed in our community. Things such as youth programs, public health, including mental health, libraries, parks and rec, the education system, and community development. So in order to create a community that is different than what we have right now, that's different than what we've had in the past, I know that I am not alone in wanting to see the City Council address how we can begin to use our money differently. Thank you.
That was perfect. Thank you, Ms. Mathis.
Oh, do I edit? Okay, thank you.
What's that? Okay, thank you.
Artis Jones, 3733 Delaware Street, Beaumont, Texas.
Yes, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Artis Jones. Okay, I've been in my house on Delaware Street. I live right across the street from Wuthering Heights Park, and we flood consistently. What I have is a picture of cars underwater that are on the street right by my house. Now, I've been here the whole time. I've seen the guys' list. My area is nowhere on that list. I did notice Delaware and I think it was Dowling on the list. That doesn't flood at all. But a place where cars are underwater is not even on the list. I don't understand that. We flood after we flooded, of course, during Harvey, 50 inches of rain. I held up 43 inches of rain. And 2 weeks ago, on May 14th, 10 inches of rain flooded. So we talked to the department. We've talked to the street and drainage department. We've called 311. We've talked to people. They drove through, and we also requested that we get barriers put in front of to stop cars from coming through, because water still comes inside my house. And so instead of them putting anything to stop vehicles from coming through, the Beaumont city trucks came through, just put more water in my house just by driving by. So we just want to know if there's going to be anybody to clean out the ditches. I'm trying to figure out why come this area isn't on any kind of list. Tiffany Murphy, the news, they just walk through every time because they know right in front of my house is going to flood every time. And on top of that, what just recently happened is I just filled 150 bags of sand because I thought we was going to have a storm this past week, but it missed us. And I just filled 150 bags myself, and I bought some flood bags, ones that absorb water. Also put those in front of my house as well. But usually, I think the city can fix this. So that's my little cry for help.
Yes, sir, Mr. Jones, thank you. And again,
Thank you for being here. We'll offer the same thing to you.
Yes, sir.
Molly Villarreal is our city engineer. Mr. Barkowiak stepped out, but we got to meet you out at your property.
Okay.
I don't know if this would work. This is just an idea. Mentioned it to staff, but we ought to look at it. Wuthering Heights Park, right near your house.
Right.
Maybe we can divert water to the park. Then we'd have to make improvements. People use that trail all the time, right?
Yes, sir.
But the part inside the trail, maybe we can bring water, dig it out a certain depth, bring water
That would be a great
hold
idea.
water, get it off the street. So that's something that
Yeah.
they need to look at.
I just want to I'll show you the picture.
I'm familiar with it. Yeah, it's a problem.
So any type of assistance would be appreciated from anyone. So, hey.
But if we have your name and number, but we need to reach out to him. Let's go out there and meet with him as well.
Okay.
See specifically where he lives and how we can try to help you.
Hey, any kind of assistance would be appreciated, and I thank you for it.
thank you, Mr. Jones.
Yes.
Caleb Peterson, 1620 Wellington Place, Beaumont, Texas.
Yes, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Caleb M. Peterson. I'm an accounting student at Lamar University. Today I'm going to be citing some data that I pulled from the comprehensive annual financial reports and the 2020 adopted budget. As was discussed earlier in the meeting, revenues for fiscal year 2020 will fail to meet previous estimations made when the 2020 budget was adopted as a result of the COVID-19 shutdown. During fiscal years 2016 through 2019, the overall population of Beaumont has decreased by 0.45%. In that time period, funds earmarked for the Beaumont Police Department have been increased by 2.7%, with the department having added 23 new civilian positions in those 3 years. Our police are by far the city's biggest expenditure on the Statement of Revenues and Expenditures. Sorry, I'm a nervous public speaker.
That's okay.
The overall inflation of the US dollar was 2.13% during that time. For the adopted 2020 budget, sales and use taxes were estimated to contribute $42,582,500 to the general fund, while expenditures earmarked for police were in the amount of $40,493,300. I know that Beaumont has a crime problem, but studies have shown that increasing police resources and beefing up police forces does not decrease crime. You lower crime by tackling poverty, of which this city also has a problem. In their ordinance to amend the 2020 budget, I implore the members of Beaumont City Council to reappropriate some of these funds into community development, as they talked about earlier, and initiatives that are actually proven to lower crime: affordable housing, mental health and addiction counseling, youth outreach, and especially improving our underfunded schools. I believe that formation of a civilian review board is also necessary in order to address any alleged use of excessive force made by law enforcement. This would lead to increased community buy-in, trust, and participation in local government. I'm aware that we have a civilian advisory council, but I do not think that it is currently satisfactory. I think that it should be looked at or maybe amended. Thank you for listening. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson.
Mark Faggart, 3715 Long Avenue, Beaumont, Texas.
Good afternoon, members of the City Council. I think the majority of y'all know why I'm here today. As a result of the incident, the rain of May the 14th, for the first time since November of 1993, I had raw sewage and matter flowing out of the toilet in the front of my home. I have been down here to speak before on behalf of other people who've had this problem. I furnished the photographs of the overflow from my toilet to various members of the City Council. I think this is an unacceptable condition for any person that lives within the city of Beaumont. My perception is that the sewer and drainage problems in this city are getting increasingly worse. We had a 6-inch rain in 2 hours, and my only hope for the city of Beaumont is we don't have these same kind of problems with the next major storm. It was very difficult to hear what was going on in here during the presentation of the engineering firm. But what I didn't hear was what does this $1.9 million that the city spent on this engineering study do to correct the raw sewage problem that we have backing up into the city, the members of this community's homes on a routine basis. I didn't hear one thing about how that got addressed. And maybe I missed it because we couldn't really hear in there, but that seems to deal with the water drainage stuff. Has nothing to do with the sewage issue. So my question to y'all is, what are we going to do about that? Is it going to be necessary for the citizens of this community to file a complaint with the Texas Commission for Environmental Quality and come out and investigate all these complaints and then start fining the city $10,000 a pop? Because that's what they can do. As a matter of fact, I talked to them after I spoke with certain members of the city council, and I wanted to file one, they would have accepted it. But the big problem we have is when the citizens of this community want to file these complaints, the Texas Commission for Environmental Quality throws up this, well, we have a compliance agreement with the city of Beaumont, so we're really not going to do anything. And that's what you get if you call the Public Works Department here. Go ahead and call them, we don't care. Because several people have relayed that to me. And that's unfair to the citizens of this community. It's blatantly unfair. It's unfair for people who live in raw filth. And the little lady that spoke before me, I saw the photographs of her home where she can't even get in a brand new house because the flood water won't let her get in her home. That's inexcusable. This city council can do better. I know every one of y'all. It's time, the time to fix the problem is now, okay? And one other thing, Mr. Hayes mentioned something about putting out this $1.9 million study as much as he can for the public to view. In my opinion, that's a public record. And it won't cost this city $1,000 to have an IT tech download it into a Dropbox and put it on the Facebook page, on a public record page. We're entitled to see it. We paid for it. And I don't know of any privilege under the law that keeps the city from doing that. And if I'm mistaken, I'd like to hear it. But I think we're entitled to have that, Kyle.
You are.
And I think it's a simple fix, and I think transparency calls for it. It's time to change this mess. I'm going over my time, but my parents, who are now 91 and 89, they've lived in that little home on La Blue for over 60 years. Between that little home and our properties at the beach, they raised 8 children, okay? They didn't deserve to have their home flooded, a mill to be displaced, have to deal with the roofing, the flooding issues and everything else, redoing their home at their ages. And another thing I think the city council needs to think about.
Please bring your.
I understand. I'm going to wrap it up.
Okay, thank you.
What's going to happen to this city if FEMA, who insures all these flood policies, decide, well, City of Beaumont's not doing what they need to do. We're going to subrogate all these insurance claims we've had to pay and sue the city. That's going to cost the city a lot of money, potentially. So I think the moral of the story, it's time to act. I really appreciate y'all hearing me. I appreciate y'all hearing me individually when I talk to y'all. But I think it's time for the city really to do something.
Thank you, Mr. Faggard.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you, Mr. Faggard.
We are doing a sanitary sewer overflow initiative, is that right, to help address that?
We are, and I'm just going to state some facts. The city council, y'all approved, now, I wasn't aware of his situation. Maybe it's at his parents' house.
I wasn't either.
And so first hearing about it, you've got over $6 million worth of pipe bursting work in this city right now. That's probably at least twice as much as I've seen. So you're doing a lot. I sat down with key staff, and I want you to know, and ask them how many citizens, because you're out there every day working with them. We have over 40,000 customers. How many citizens are you aware of that cannot flush their toilets, okay? That you're aware of. They could name only 3. And I know there's more out there, but that's what they could name that they were aware of. So when he talks about chronic problems and people not being able to flush their toilet, we go out there, now we're tracking it. But you have to make a determination, is it our main line that has a problem, or is it their line? So that's the first determination. So a lot of people can easily point to the city and say, I cannot flush my toilet when it rains, and blame the city of Beaumont. That's not always the case. So you have to look at it individually, go out there and make that determination. Is it our problem or is it their problem? So I can speak from experience. When a young guy living on 23rd Street and couldn't flush my toilet when it rained. I couldn't. But that was my problem, because I had an old clay line and I had to replace it at that time, $4,000 or $5,000, which was a lot of money. At that time, it's a lot of money now, especially as prices increase. But you have to, again, whose responsibility is it? So I don't know his situation. We haven't maybe been out there yet, but we should. I don't know who he called on the council, but let me know the address, if that's where he lives or if that's the house he's speaking of. But again, let's look at it individually and determine what the facts are. And if it's our problem, then we ought to try to fix it. That's our job.
Absolutely.
If it's their problem, we need to tell them it's their responsibility, and then we need to put it in the system, which they're doing now. So when we get that call in the future, we can say, wait a minute, we've been out there on such and such date, and that new system y'all approved, this software system, we have that capability now. We're implementing it within our different departments, and you'll be able to go in real time and see what the issues are. So again, let's look at each, when he comes up here and states some things that I would say maybe aren't fact, let's look and see what the facts are on each situation and then deal with them accordingly.
Very good, thank you.
Christina McCullum, 655 Howell Street, Beaumont, Texas.
Hello. Oh.
You can push it down. There you are.
Hi. So first off, I'd like to thank each of you so much for your service in looking out for what's best for our community and your intentions to look out for what's best for our community's future. I would like to propose that I'm a second grade educator, so I teach second grade here in Beaumont, and I would like to propose that we purchase and distribute textbooks and social studies books that intertwine and integrate Black history with American history more than what's there currently. This is something I feel strongly about. I feel like Black history, we now have it segregated into a month, which, yes, that's fine. It's a time to be celebrated, but it should be throughout the history books and match with what's happening in current history. They're hard, difficult things to talk about, but those are things that need to happen. Ira Aldridge, I'm not sure how familiar you are, but he was a Shakespearean. He was in plays during the time of slavery. When we talk about theater in school, we need to do this where we match subject and text, history dates, with what went on through those times. So when we're talking about theater, he's one who during the time of slavery, he needs to be mentioned for what he overcame. There's a lot of misconceptions. There's a lack of perception. And I feel like a lot of that can go back to the roots. Frederick Douglass, of course, the leader in the abolitionist movement, a friend of Abraham Lincoln, side by side. I feel like his story needs to be told with Abraham Lincoln's story. So we need to find those textbooks in this area and make sure that those are distributed appropriately. He said that if there's not a struggle, there is no progress, from Frederick Douglass. And I know that it's hard to talk about these topics with students sometimes, but at the same time, that struggle has to be met so that progress can be made. And then also, he says that it is easier to build up children than to repair broken men. And we can see in this community, there's real things happening that needs real change. And that increased perspective, and of course, decreasing the misconception. Now, there's not enough time. They're not talking about, to each their own. Like, okay, yes, I'm going to talk about this because it's something based on what I'm convicted about or what you think is important in history. Instead, I'm asking that this be mandatory through our district. I'm not sure how much power we have in private schools for Beaumont, but I feel like these things should be discussed so that we can move toward progress in our cities. And then by subject, of course, I mean when we're looking at like George Washington. Okay.
You go ahead, and if you're almost finished, please just go ahead.
I'll be
I
back
gave
next
everybody else a little
Tuesday.
bit of time.
Okay, but George Washington Carver, of course, he was an agriculturalist. There needs to be, he's right there with Henry Wallace, right there with Truman. We need to know who these people are and how they're related, and it needs to be ingrained into our soul. So for me, I feel like then we go into the Underground Railroad, Little Ruby Bridges, Rosa Parks, but we talk about this story of overcoming so those misconceptions are not there. So whatever emphasizes the tenacity, the courage, the determination, strength, and fervor that this race has had to undergo, it needs to be discussed in the classroom and celebrated. So then our perspective changes.
Thank you, Ms. McCullum.
Thank you.
And you're welcome back anytime.
Okay, that's one proposal. I have two more. Okay. Thank you very much.
Jason Marshburn, 1070 Monterey Drive, Beaumont, Texas.
Good afternoon. Life, liberty, and property is what our nation is founded upon. It's something that John Locke had written many years ago. We have rights to life, liberty, and property. Oftentimes, the life, liberty, property is not always afforded to everybody, which I understand that in the history of our country. A lot of times we argue about what is liberty, whose is right, and a lot of these are out of balance, and that's where a lot of our conflict comes from. 100 years ago, or almost 100 years ago, we had a group of people we didn't afford the rights to life, liberty, and property. What happened was basically chaos took over. This is the day before social media, and people had the correct information. They used this the rumor mill, and it started at a big riot. A lot of people had their lives destroyed, their property destroyed, and it was an awful time in history. Something we will never repeat again, I believe, at least not here in the United States of America. Another thing is, of course, we've marginalized a lot of people in our country. The Native Americans, of course, people who are African American, we marginalized, and also women, of course. It's only been like 100 years since we let women vote in this country, which is, it's just the way it is. I don't know. That was way before I was born. But we still have problems where we're not actually affording the equal life, liberty, and property rights to all of our citizens. For instance, if somebody was out there on the street, they bought a pack of cigarettes and they want to go on the street and sell them piece by piece, that's against the law. Now, it doesn't hurt anybody to do that, right? It's not hurting, anybody to, it's not harming anybody at all, but they're still against the law. And that doesn't make any sense to me, because there should always be a sense of harm being remedied in each law you make. And sometimes there's laws made where it's not any remedy. And another thing is, I think a lot of people right now are fear of not having police out there. And some people think that police are the ones that are being stopping people's life and liberty and property. Other people are saying that, that's what keeps us from going in the state of nature, kind of like the Lord of the Flies, And so that's a conflict that we all have to be, and I'm really glad that Beaumont does a lot of good things, like community policing, these neighborhood associations, the copping kids. I believe we have less conflict than what other cities have. It's not perfect. I'm not going to say it's perfect, but generally we all respect each other's rights to life, liberty, property. We may not agree every time exactly what the balance is, but I'm just happy that Beaumont doesn't have all these troublemakers, and we keep our beautiful city in one piece. And that would really make me sad if something happened to my hometown and any resident in my hometown or anything else in my hometown. We don't want any chaos and disorder. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Morse.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. Thank you.
Jeremy Povelich, 695 Chamberlain Drive, Beaumont, Texas.
I think I'd be good at that by now. Hey, good afternoon, Mayor, City Council, and staff. I'm going to keep this really brief because I know we've all been here quite a long time. Did want to give you all an update. My street looks amazing. I am the Director of Marketing and Recruiting for my organization, and I can honestly say that I think my recruiting efforts are going to be pretty good this year, so I really appreciate all y'all's hard work, and I can't say it enough. It feels great to know that a local contractor did that work. I did make some observations, took a lot of pictures of the progress and the work as it went through. Documentation, I'd love to share that with any of you who'd like to look at that. I will say this, like I said, I am a recruiter. Y'all city workers, when it came to fixing some of the water leaks they had in the street, I was very impressed, and honestly, I might be trying to steal them from you, so don't hold that against me.
Whoa. We will.
Just wanted to reiterate, I know I'd spoken to Chris Boone in the past. Y'all brought up the sewer renovation program once again. And if there's anything that we can do as far as labor in this area to help y'all promote anything like that, we would jump at the opportunity. We are here as a resource, and we'd love to help because, you know, it's one of the main things we hear on my end as far as being a plumber in the city of Beaumont. And we all know a lot of the time that problem does reside on their side of the system. So, Chris, if there's anything we can do to help y'all out and get that word out, I won't hesitate. Y'all have a great afternoon, and thank y'all for this opportunity.
Appreciate it, Mr. Pavlich. Thank you so much.
That's all I have, Mayor.
Okay. There's no one else, right? Okay. All right, we'll move to council member comments. I'll start with you, Councilmember Neal.
No comment, Mayor.
Okay, Councilmember Getz.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to say thank you to the men and women of our police department. It's a tough time to be an officer right now. Now, there's cries around the country for defunding police departments, wanting to have progressive changes made to our police departments. I don't know if the citizens that are asking for these things are fully aware of the types of programs and initiatives that are already in place in the Beaumont Police Department. But I'm aware of them, and I appreciate you, and I just want to say thank you. When we talked about opening up the playgrounds, we said we were going to assess the rest of the city facilities on a weekly basis. I've had a lot of people reaching out to me wanting to know when we're going to open up other venues like the event center. People have had it booked, have had weddings, June weddings planned, have had to cancel them, push it back, scrambling around to find other venues. I believe the governor's order on Friday is going to put limits at 75%. 75% of the event center is a lot of people in terms of capacity. I understand that we're going to have to vote on each specific thing that we're going to open up. Is that right, Mr. Hayes? So I'm asking council to consider someone having me second my request to open up the event center, certainly no later than June 30th, but it's going to have to be put on an agenda, and I'm going to need a second. So if anybody feels so inclined to open that back up, I'd appreciate a second. And if there's any other facility that anybody else wants to talk about opening up, I think it's time, and it's probably past time, but I'm ready. Thank you.
I know we can't have a discussion, but I'd like to make a statement about that. We need to see what the governor's going to say this week. However, the 75% for the restaurants on June 16th or whenever, I think it's around June 16th, and they went from 25 to 50 to 75%. That does not include venues. And I did speak with Emily Wheeler this morning because we met with the symphony, and the venues are very specific in that you have to skip a row of people. You have to have at least 2 seats between every party. It would probably give us 300 something right now as it stands at, say, the Julie. They're talking about some great ideas and we're working with them, but the 25, 50, and 75% that the governor's put in place for restaurants does not apply to our venues. That's very, very clear. Now, but the event center is a venue to where we would have to, that we are renting out to people. And I don't want to have a conversation because we're not supposed to, but I just want the council to hear that because we've looked at it. It specifically says venues. Venue is not a restaurant. We might, I want people to have their weddings too, but you have to do what the governor says right now. We'll have to see what he comes up with, and the way we leave it with everyone is that we will assess it as it changes. But right now you have to have a row between every single row of seats, and you have to have at least 2 seats between every group of people. And so if it changes, we need to look at that, just letting you know. I would interpret the event center to be a venue. Would you count? Okay, thank you. Just what it's worth. Okay. Yes. Okay. Anything? Okay. Councilman, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. June is the birth month of one of Beaumont's. Can you hear me? It's your birthday too, Tina. Babe Zaharias. She was born in 1911, and as we discussed earlier, it was mentioned, when she was born, women couldn't even vote. But she certainly made a name for herself and brought a lot of publicity to our community. As many of you know, our Babe Zaharias Foundation is working on several different projects. One is to update the museum, which hopefully we'll have completed here in the next week or two. I really want to tell everybody how much we appreciate Keith Folsom and his team working with us, because it is the Babe Zaharias Museum and Convention and Visitors Center. But we've also been really involved with Lamar University and have 7 endowed scholarships for female athletes out there. And tomorrow, one of the projects that we also developed was recognizing high school golfers, male and female golfers. And so tomorrow night we'll be doing that. Of course, we'll follow all the protocols of social distancing, etc. But it gives us a chance to identify those golfers that, although their season was cut short, still to recognize what they were able to do up until that point in time, because the class of 2020, has really lost out on a whole lot of things, which is hard for us to comprehend because, it was just routine things when we were getting out of high school of what we were going to do and this, that, and the other. And for them to basically miss the last several months of school and not to participate in golf, tennis, baseball, extracurricular activities, much less school. But we take a lot of pride in being able to recognize those individuals this year. We've had over the years, Braden Bailey is one of our recipients who this last year got his opportunity to play in his first PGA event, and we anticipate that there are other young golfers that are coming out, and that's what we want to do, is encourage young people to get involved and realize that there's opportunities out there for them. And golf's a great sport that doesn't require 11 more people to round up and and have a game. You can actually go out and do it by yourself. But I just want to say we are really proud of that. Like I said, it's about our 15th year that we've done it. But to be able to encourage those kids to be good student athletes, understand we give a leadership award as well of those students that are involved in their community and get out and do things for their community, as well as just their ability to play golf. But again, really proud of it. And if you get a chance and you hadn't Googled Babe Didrikson Zaharias recently or ever, you might want to do that and realize that that was somebody that really grew up right here in Beaumont, Texas, and helped put Beaumont on the map as far as athletes were concerned. And there's a long legacy of great athletes come out since then. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Samuel.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't look at groups of people and make decisions about those people. Just as I don't make decisions about people because of color. Police department, the blue. I have friends that are police officers. I respect police officers. I believe majority of our department are good officers trying to do the best they can to serve and protect our community. Last Tuesday, before the council meeting, I was approached by someone that showed me a wrong that they saw on social media, a video. What I saw, I believed was wrong. I stated how I felt at the time. I was verbally attacked because of what I said. But I believe when a person remains silent in the face of oppression, they become complicit with the oppressor. And therein lies the problem. Simply because I voiced my concern about what I saw and what I felt, I was subject to attack. That's okay. I will not remain silent in the face of injustice. In 1619, my forefathers were brought here unwillingly, 400 years ago as slaves. Helped build this nation, helped build the streets, the buildings, the cities, the towns, this country. And for 250 years, they were shackled and in chains. They were not set free until 250 years later. They didn't get their 40 acres and a mule. 1964, we were granted equal rights. 100 years later, after fighting the wars, we had black men and women going off to war to fight for liberty and justice for all, to come back to this country and be treated as second-class citizens. And now, 401 years later, we're still fighting for liberty and justice, fighting the viral cancer of systemic racism because of the lack of access to adequate health care, educational equity, equal housing opportunities, equal employment, equal pay, accumulation of wealth. How dare you, privileged, tell me what I should feel, what I should think about what I see with my own eyes, what I live every day. Those of you who says it doesn't matter, you can go straight to hell along with the satanic spirit that you're riding with. The hottest place in hell is preserved for those who remain neutral in the face of great moral conflict. For those who care, let's work together, understanding and loving one another to bring about change. Showing rather than talking about what you will do to bring our country together. We can't wait. Let's do more than just talk about the issues. Let's begin to start doing those things that can bring about a solution. There are things we can do right now. We can speak out against injustice when we see it. We received emails within the last month speaking out about some of the vestiges of centuries of symbolic acceptance of blatant racism in our face. We have to begin to help heal the wounds, particularly by removing those symbolic honoring the Confederate cause, or the soldiers of the Confederate Army, or the statues. How can you heal until you fix the problem? We can wait until the cries for help turns to screaming in the streets. Or we can do the right thing because we know it's the right thing to do. In the end, we will not remember the words of our enemies, but it will be the silence of our friends. I hope you hear me. I hope you hear them. Because eventually, a change has to come. Will you be a part of that change, or will you continue to be a part of the problem?
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Mouton.
Thank you, Mayor. First of all, I would like to congratulate the class of 2020. They've gone through a lot of obstacles this year just to get to the point of graduation. So, class of 2020, congratulations. Also, I would like to send condolences to the family of George Floyd, where he was laid to rest today in Houston, his birth home. I am a council member. I am a mother of an African American son and 2 grandsons. On last Tuesday, a video was sent to my phone. I was accused of rushing to judgment by the police union based on what I viewed. What I viewed for 10 seconds didn't change the fact of seeing the officer knee to the neck and back of the young black man that was 17. I spoke with Chief Singletary, and I viewed the officer's body cam of the entire incident. I was very disturbed by what I saw. I disagreed with the excessive force that was used. As a council member that served a population largely of a black and brown community, how dare I not speak up? we were just a few seconds away from being another Minneapolis. Each member of this council could have ruled on a possible lawsuit that can affect each taxpayer paying citizen in this city. Chief Singletary has made the immediate change to remove the technique of the use of the knee to the neck and head. Some councils across the country had to vote to remove that same technique. We didn't, and I thank Chief Singletary for removing that. In conclusion, we as citizens need to respect authority, and authority needs to respect human lives. That's all I have, ma'am.
Thank you, Councilmember. Okay, I don't have a lot. I just want to, I looked up Councilman Getz, and he brought up the event center and looked it up, and it's 50%, and that's where the row came in with the symphony, where you have to skip a row and skip the amounts, because that's how many they can put in there. We'd have to do the same thing at the event center. There's no indication that the change that will be made, I'm not saying for sure because we don't ever know, but the change that will be made on Friday will include venues. It includes restaurants, we've heard, but not any venues yet, but we are watching it. I just want to make sure I made that clear. I wasn't real clear on that. Because there's a fine arts and performance halls checklist along with the venue checklist that we're using. And I have to give Emily Wheeler credit, the director of our facilities. She is keeping up with it through the state of Texas and with other individuals that are in her same capacity at and at other cities. So we met with the symphony today, and we do appreciate them as a partner, and they understand. And we're going to bring everything back as soon as we can. But now, as we've mentioned before, the governor's order supersedes all others. And so we have to continue to follow that. Some people like it, some people don't. But that's what we got to do. As far as what's been talked about some today, I just want to say that I appreciate the different groups that have, for lack of a better word, because there was a lot of words, put together peaceful protests in Beaumont. Everyone has the right to feel the way they feel, and many of us have different reasons for how we feel, how we were brought up, different things that have happened in the past. And I just want to thank the Beaumont community and those surrounding community for respecting each other and keeping the words and the actions peaceful. Michael Cooper with NAACP was here earlier, has been a real leader in that, and I talk to him every week, and he's been very good to work with through the police department, along with us if we choose to work with them. I also want to thank the police officers that have gone out and been peaceful with the peaceful protesters. I think that, as was said earlier, the only way that we're going to get past this is if we communicate. We don't always understand where someone else is coming from, but communication, I believe, is always the key. I feel like that we can, if we tell each other how we feel, whether we have bias or not, and I don't mean racism, I mean bias, for whatever reason, then if we can talk about it, sometimes we can understand it better. And that's what I hope happens, that comes out of this, because I just want to say, though, that I'm just so very, very proud of everyone that's been involved in any way, shape, or form. When you compare what's going on around our country, that doesn't mean that there's not change that needs to be made in a lot of areas, but what it does mean is that we are working together to try to get through that. And I'm glad Councilmember Mouton made the comment about Chief Singletary. I did visit with him, and he did make the decision to change in a technique. I learned a lot about that through this that I did not know, and I appreciate Jason Plunkett for kind of walking me through why they do some of the things they do, and how it affects different people and how it should happen. And I think once we start to understand where everyone's coming from, we can come together, because it's my hope and my prayer every day that that we can communicate better. We can, we're still going to have criminals. We're still going to have people that do things wrong. But I think if we just continue to try our very best to work together and recognize the thoughts of other people, and I don't even know how other to say it than that. And I'm listening and really trying to figure out what our next steps should be. But I think we're on the right track, and I hope we will continue to be on the right track. And like I said, I commend all the people that have been involved. I've talked to a lot of organizers in addition, and I've talked to a lot of police officers, and I think that we all truly deep down want the same goal. How we get there is another question that we have to work through, but I think communication is the key. And I will communicate and do whatever I need to do. I believe that injustice is bad, but sometimes we just need to step back and look at the entire picture in every way, and I mean from every aspect. I have been in a situation before where I was accused of something I didn't do, and it was very scary. I was young, and I was in a car, and it wasn't the Beaumont police. It was actually Highway Patrol, and actually pulled a gun on me because they thought that I had robbed a bank because I was in a certain type of car. I was like 16. So it was pretty scary, so I can imagine. So just try to understand how everyone else feels, and let's try to move through this and work together, communicate, and truly make it where we learn from a bad situation. Sometimes it takes horrible situations to bring people together and make them learn what's really important. And I think it's really important that we move our city forward and do everything that we can to prevent racism in every way, shape, or form, and any injustice that might be served to any of our citizens. So I thank y'all for coming today. I know it's been a long meeting. I don't know if anybody's left over in our room over there, but probably not. But I appreciate everything that y'all done, and thanks for the work sessions. Very good, and I really did appreciate Lan being here. I think it sheds a lot of light on what we have to do, and it's we're in a tough situation. We've got a lot to look at, and the funding is difficult, and I know it takes a long time. But I think everybody wants to achieve the same goal in this area, that area as well. So thanks so much.